Okay, so what I'm going to be doing today and how I'm going to be doing it is going to be coming from a construction standpoint. I'm holding my pencil in various different ways. I'll probably be holding it like this. I'll probably be holding it like this. I'll rarely be holding it like this, except for when I'm probably talking to all of you and I switch into a mode of thinking where it goes back to whatever bad habits I have, because that's sort of what we all do. If there's like that auto, like, default that we set to, it's bad habit. And so if I end up in that place, it's probably because I'm concentrating on talking about something and my hand just kind of creeps up and becomes this. But I rarely go into that mode because in this mode, you're working from this part of your hand and that tends to anchor things down. Now, for a detail, that anchoring might be good because you want small precision. But in the case of what we're going to be doing today, everything that we're going to be doing, or I'm going to be doing today, is broad stroke related. That stupid word, we. We're going to be doing this today. I don't know where that comes from. But anyway, so everything is broad stroke, and I'm using the side of the pencil, and I'm using the softer edge. I won't be putting any lines down that are absolute and sharp right away because that's a killer for any kind of drawing you do. What I mean by a killer is that once something sharp goes down, once something high contrast goes down, let's say we make our drawing really dark. Now, this becomes the lowest point of value that your brain perceives. So as you draw everything else, you try to match it or go even darker because we need to really make it work. And so I try to keep things as lightweight as possible. Now, when I'm demonstrating, obviously on the camera, that's not going to show up. So I have to be a little heavier handed about this. And I want to make these things clear up front that the things that I do when I'm showing you how to draw are different from what I do when I work because I have to change everything to make it more visible for the camera and the lighting that we have and so forth. I probably wouldn't be working in Prismacolor either if I was doing some kind of high-end rendering because you can't really erase this. Once it goes down, it's down forever, which is why I use this when I demonstrate because I try not to demonstrate with an eraser if I can help it because I don't want to show like, that everything has to be clean. I'd rather have the bad and the good all in the same place together at the same time and continue working through it. That way, that, because when I do like my written demonstrations, I have this very clean line about it, and everything is very precision. And I'm doing that for the sake of the demo. I'm not doing that because I want to draw like this. I feel that for learning purposes, everything needs to be as clear as possible, even if that means kind of stepping out of your own skin for a moment and just being very mechanical about it, which is how a lot of my demonstrations end up appearing in a step-by-step process. They have a very mechanical quality to them, and that's for clarity. Now, if I was going to say, well, this is how I would normally draw, like this right here, it's very lightweight, and under the camera, that doesn't show up very well. But to our eye can perceive the subtlest of details. And so even like if I try to go really lightweight here, this line right here that I'm drawing, our eye can pick that up from a great distance. If we have pretty decent eyes, we can see that. And all of these things together on the page now, like when I'm working, my template is very lightweight, but I can see it. It's almost like there's an invisible grid there. And then I go right on top of that and I make completed passes at things, finishing them off as I go, because the grid told me this is where that thing needs to go. And so then I come into a finish, or I'll explore whatever it is that I need to fix within that space, and I'll look for options if I need to. And all of those will be lightweight. And then when I'm ready to, then I commit to the lines that I know are going to be the permanent drawing. But all that fishing that goes on underneath is really important because we don't know, even when you're really good at what you do, or you've been doing it for a long time, there's still always going to be a level of mystery or a level of unsureness every time you put a line down. I don't know if this is, well, that's going to be it anyway. And you rely a lot on autopilot to get you through things confidently. If you've had confident bouts before with a drawing, then it'll come back again, on recall once you get into that zone. But there's always going to be a level where you don't really know what's going on and you have to find it. And I think the more you do this, the more unsure you get. I don't know what that is all about, but I think it's because as you pass through a certain level of information that you've now learned and you've acquired to your own work, you're looking for the next one. And because you're looking for the next one, all this other stuff you've learned seems like it's like in this box called doubt. I doubt I can do it. I'm not sure if I can do it, because you're not really looking at that box, you're looking ahead. And yet that box is there. And even though we doubt we can get to that next thing, we still have a toolbox full of tools that we can rely upon. And we have to come back to the table and come back to warming up and doing these things to remind us that, oh, yeah, this is something that I'm capable of doing. Now, the reference that I'm going to be working from today, unfortunately, doesn't fit within this little tiny space. I want to draw big. So what I'm going to do is zoom out for a little bit to do the broad strokes. And I'll show you my zoom out right here so that I can actually get from here all the way down to here on the page. And this gives me more space to draw the figure in. But then once that's drawn in, I'll zoom back in and I'll focus on little areas within the figure. So,
hey Ron, may I interject?
yes.
How large of paper are you working on right now, and what kind of paper is that?
Okay, so thank you. This is 11 by 17 Xerox paper. I have an 11 by 17 clipboard to go along with it. This is the size that I do a lot of my work. Why did the lighting just go bad?
I know, I just noticed that too, and I have no idea why. It did it as you were moving. It
All right.
kind of come back. That is so bizarre. This is the problem we had earlier, guys, so hopefully it'll remedy itself. Well, that looks okay. Well, no. Wow.
Okay. Well, we're losing a light for now. That light was what did it. It caused the banding. And I think it may be, oh, you know what it is? I know exactly what it is. This is a really bright surface. The lights are like right here on my desk, right underneath. I brought the paper up. It blew the white balance. And when I brought it back down, the white balance tried to figure itself out and it couldn't.
Ah, gotcha.
So,
Oh, the white balance wasn't auto locked on that thing. Oh, came back now, and it looks beautiful right now. So
yeah, usually it takes about 30 seconds for white balance and other things in a camera to reset. So I just did that.
were you at, was it you I was speaking to at EluxCon about that weird lamp that was giving everything after images? Like,
No.
it was so bizarre. There was a lamp in the hotel room that literally was making me see after images of people.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes, that was.
It was so crazy. It's amazing what like just the flicker of light does when we can't see it, you know? Anyways,
Exactly.
I don't mean to interrupt your groove here. So it's
Oh, no
just
worries.
regular printing bond paper.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so yeah, this stuff is just from Office Depot. I burned through this paper very quickly, and also for purpose of demos and for purpose of like for print demonstrations. I like the drawings to be small enough to scan, but big enough to put information inside of. And for me, 11 by 17 is sort of that like happy medium. I mean, I can sit there and draw small all day long, but small is kind of inferior for every purpose. And when you blow that up on a scan, the line weight is huge all of a sudden. Your line that's really small here is going to be a shape when you blow it up 600% or 700% to actually make it work. So I've also found because I do comics and illustration and concept art and all these other things, line weight is important for a lot of these different factors. And I've found that working at comic book size, 11 by 17, creates this like almost perfect line weight. And I think, comic book artists worked this out long ago. They know. So if we kind of follow their conventions, then we end up with something that feels pleasing or reasonable for our own work. And line weight is an issue. And when we talk about like line weight for print, you have to be very mindful that it's not too thin and or not too thick. The thickness thing, it can turn out really horrible in printing, especially along the edges. What you don't see with your eye in a line is the grittiness of an edge. And there is one there. And there's, even with pencil, there's a certain point when the line becomes too destructive. And you do have to sharpen your art before it goes to print, because pixels are never really sharp enough. They have kind of a soft, fuzzy quality to them. And when you go to sharpen your artwork up and you have line work that's in there like this stuff becomes the noise of doom for your picture, because these little spots become these focal points of grit, kind of like this line is right here. It's very gritty looking. And everything else in your picture has a quality to it that's nice and pleasing to the eye, except for those little unpleasant areas. And those all of a sudden now become the focus in the picture. So line weight is an issue. When I do life drawing, I'm working on an 18 by 24 pad, and my hand has the ability to draw in a very large scale, which is important too, because when you're studying something, I don't think it's very fair for you to study it at that scale right there. If you're going to study a portrait, as an example, it might be a good idea to go life size or under. And I recommend not going over life size, because it's a bit more difficult to control the drawing. You have to back up much farther from your work to see the whole piece. And the only way that you're going to know, like, as let's just say this circle is the portrait that I'm working on, and these are the eyeballs. And I focus in on this one eye, and I start building the details within it, and I stay right here for too long. I have no longer related this eyeball to the rest of this page, all this other stuff on the rest of the page. And it's important to do that because the line weight is now changing, the contrast is changing, the sharpness, that is. It's becoming sharper, and sharpness within this little tiny space, when you're zoomed way in, that means like your head is close to the page for us, means that you're going to see a certain range of softness to sharpness within this space. But when you back up from the drawing, everything is super sharp, because this is like macro, in that, or micro in that space to the macro. And when you back out from it, you realize now that this is so sharp that everything else has to come up in sharpness to match it. And it was because we were so close to that space for too long that it has now set the tone for how everything else needs to be built. And so you try to stay as general as possible. So I try to work at an arm's length. I try to work as big and as large as possible in the motion and the movement. And then from there, as I need details, I'll work in broad strokes. And the details for me now, when I call something a detail, what I mean is a smaller shape. So I use the word detail in these lectures because it's the word you all know. And it's the word that you all kind of work with a function to it. I don't use the word detail, though. I use it only in lecture form, because a detail is really nothing more than a smaller shape. That's all it is. And so the shape language that I speak goes all the way down to the minutia. And that minutia being detail level for most, I'm just calling it small shape level. I'm doing small cubes, I'm doing small cylinders, I'm doing small pyramids or triangles or cones or whatever. And on the graphic level, the littlest of marks are still being controlled in their scale and direction, in their volume and their softness and sharpness. All of that stuff is still being taken into account. I'm not just like slapping my hand down going, yay, there's stuff. It's like I got everything under control the whole time, and including that last detail. I don't know how many of you draw with your focus on the entire time, or if you go into autopilot. But the autopilot can build some really inspiring things, except for at the very end when you need to wrap it up. And then our brain goes into sharp focus mode. And when we go into sharp focus mode, our hand changes the grip on our pencil or our brush or whatever, and we go into a completely different way of thinking about things. And that's why I don't use that word detail. I use this as a language, the shape thing as a language, all the way down, because I don't want to change my way of thinking, because that changes the picture, or at least a part of the picture, when in these little areas of focus. And I want the whole thing to be a big, broad, general pass all the way down to the end. And I'm always back far enough from it to see the big picture as it's evolving. A lot of the compositions I do, I'll start off with a thumbnail, and the thumbnail will have, just some really basic volumes set up, because what I'm looking at is like this thing in here that I thought was kind of a cool shape, but I didn't know what to use it for or do with it or whatever. And that's kind of the graphic thing that I want to say to my audience. And so then I go to work working on it. And as I evolve it and bring it up in scale, obviously things start to change a little bit. But the essence is this. This is what I want to constantly retain. And I think some of you who have seen artworks of older masters and even your own artwork sometimes say the thumbnails were always better. It was never as good when I finished it. When I got done, everything was a little too over focused, detailed, blah, 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 whatever the word is going to be. And we lose the essence of the charm of that little thumbnail. Well, that's why we make a thumbnail. And you know what? For most of us, we put this away and we never bring it back out again once we've made it. And the reason we lose the essence is because we lost our way. We found a roadmap and then we decided, oh, you know what? I know where I'm going. And you throw the roadmap aside, and this is no longer there as a viable source to help you finish your picture and find a way to get there. And this needs to remain out right next to your finish so that as you're working on this big thing, you can back up and then look at that and this and compare notes. And when you are working on that larger picture, the reason why it tends to lose is because, let's say, as an example, we built this large dragon, and in our thumbnail, it was just a little tiny movement of sorts of color. Well, when we get it to this large scale, and then all of a sudden we're adding scales into the picture, and we're adding all these details, and in these details, we bump up the contrast. So our big, bright red dragon that was here might have had a little bit of noise in it, but that little bit of noise was maybe 1 or 2 values shy of what the red was, where the lines of scales that we draw into this now have like a 5 or 6 value jump. And now all of a sudden our eye stops, our eye stops, our eye stops, our eye stops over and over again into all these little pits. And it loses the essence of this. Now, if we're aware of this being right over next to our drawing and so forth, then we can say, oh crap, I totally went too dark on these. And then you'll go find another color instead of black or some kind of liner color and use that instead. So maybe now your scales, like the whole color is like that value, and the scales are only this value inside of it. When you back up from the picture and get the big read, it starts to bring back the essence of this again. And remember that this is at a distance glance. That's what this is. This isn't right up on it looking at the details of focus. This is what you call the gallery view focus. And they say gallery view focus because when you walk into a gallery, usually the prized possession is in the back, on the back wall, and that's usually at a pretty big distance from the door, maybe 50 feet, 100 feet, whatever. And that prized picture at the back wall has a certain quality to it that caught your eye from outside the window of the building and drew you into the picture. Well, that's your thumbnail size. And at that size, that is what you want to see on your big picture. So looking at your canvases in your studio, you want that viewing distance, like step back 8 feet or 10 feet from it. If you don't have that much room in your studio, go into the living room and put it up on one side and walk all the way back to the other side and look at it at that distance, because there's something about that distance that needs to hold true from your thumbnail, or you will lose that, and it'll become this detail fest where everything is in focus and too many things are seen in the picture. Okay, so the picture that I'm going to work from, Dan, if you got those 3 images that I sent you, it's of 3 capoeira fighters that are all jumping over. It's actually one guy, and it's in 3 different images, but it looks like 3 fighters all in the same image.
Yep, I've got it.
Okay, if you want to put that up for everybody, that's going to be the image that I'm working from.
Okay, it's already done.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so this is the image that I'm working from. Now, the reason I work from this one image, I've got a lot of really great images of confusion and such, and that's what I want to start with, is images of confusion, but I also want musculature, because if I start talking about the muscles and you guys don't know those things, and they're covered up by the clothes, then it's my game versus what you think, and I'd rather you be able to follow along and see what I'm talking about.
I also, for what it's worth, Ron, I sent them links to the image. They're not seeing it right now. They have it on their computer. So if you have one that you'd like to reference on the tabletop, that's fine as well.
Okay. So yeah, so the of the 3 images, the one of the 3 capoeira fighters, and it says something like pavelmatsev.ru as the photographer down below, I believe. or maybe even the fighter. I don't remember if this was from a photographer's site or from the fighter's site. I don't remember now. That's been so long since I've grabbed all these things. Um, so the one that I'm going to work with first is going to be the dude on the ground with his arm as the post. He's basically centered and balanced on his left arm, and he's swiveling his body above it as he's pivoting away. I'm going to use that because there's several things I can talk about. One of them is the pants. So when you pick up your reference from online, because we're all going to grab from wherever we can, sometimes there is absolutely no understanding of what's going on underneath the clothing. You just know that, hey, this kind of looks right. Kind of has it's a guy with a gun and he's at the low angle that I need, and it looks almost like my illustration. So I'll go ahead and use that instead of the one that I chose for my illustration. Well, there's your mistake right there, because you've now broken your picture by choosing something a little bit different. But if you got to choose it, then at least you better know everything about it so you can manipulate it. And it's the manipulation that's going to bring you back to your image, your original thought in the first place. So in his pants, now in the design, we can see that the pant leg on the left is a straight line across from the rear all the way out to the foot. And yet we don't see a leg in there anymore, and part of it disappears and then part of it reappears again, and the leg is actually bent underneath the clothing. But you wouldn't really be able to tell that unless you can read the clothing, and that's a completely different lesson that maybe I'll come back sometime and do one of these lessons on drapery. Um, but you have to first understand what's going on underneath before you start your drawing, because we'll go back on that autopilot thing again, which I'll bring up over and over, because autopilot's sort of this bad part of us that we don't really want coming back on in the drawing over and over again. We want that thing shut off. But autopilot, what happens with it is it just assumes. And so when we look at a reference, we're just assuming now something instead of actually thinking about it and taking it in. So on these reference pieces, I'll look at them for a little while and I'll really try to think it through. Now, if you don't do physical sports, then doing a picture of somebody in a physical sport is going to be a labor. It is going to be the toughest thing for you to work on. And I don't mean this in a negative way. I mean it in it. You haven't experienced it enough to understand what it means to be upside down balancing on one arm, then this is going to be a very tough picture to build convincingly. You can copy it, but it won't quite feel right, because there's a certain amount of weight distribution in the drawing that you do that needs to feel a certain way, and the viewer will feel it or they won't. And this is where, because of the different industries that I've worked in, there's a thing called the attitude in the industry. Like everybody that does that thing, like gamers, there's a certain attitude in gamers. They all think a certain way and feel a certain way about the thing they do, while the outsider has no clue. But the outsider looks at it and goes, oh, that's a neat thing. I'm going to make a product for it. And they go and make a product. And you can tell when somebody's made that thing that doesn't fit because they have no clue. And it's almost the same thing with a drawing of some action that you've never performed before. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to go try to do this move to understand it. It just means that when you draw something, you have to be able to fit yourself into the experience and understand what you're seeing.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be very difficult.
I can relate to that a lot. For me, it's firearms, which I tend to draw a lot of in my paintings, just girls holding guns. You can tell immediately when a model has never actually fired a gun before, just from the way they handle it. And I believe that N.C. Wyeth always used to say that you had to be a master of fact, that you need to do your research and be intimate with your subject, because you're usually broadcasting it to a pretty intelligent audience. Like the people who are into this kind of art are going to be into that thing, you know?
Exactly. In fact, N.C. Wyeth was one of those teachers that we all have to kind of look at as a role model of teachers, because he sent his students off. And part of their lesson, the last 2 years of their training, one of those years was to go away and go do that thing you've always wanted to really aspire to. I think NC like Harvey Dunn went and became like a cowboy. He went and herded cattle. One of them, I don't remember who the other one was, but went up and became a fur trapper up in Alaska.
Wow.
And they all went and did these things, and then they come back, and for the second year, they paint pictures of their experiences, firsthand experiences of doing these things. and they're recalling from memory now all their experiences they had, and all of a sudden their pictures just became so they exploded with literary content because they were firsthand experiencing these things that they were now adapting to story, but the stories seemed and felt more convincing because of their firsthand experiences doing those things.
Oh, how intriguing.
And so it's sort of the same thing here, and I'm not saying that you have to go do capoeira to understand this picture, but to have ever been upside down, and this is the like the child's mind, you know. Have you ever like been with another friend where you laid down on the ground and you put your feet down like this and then launched your friend from his like putting your feet in his stomach and then launched them into the air this way? It's like those stupid things we did as kids that I'm relating to in some of these instances where I don't understand it because I've never had capoeira experience before. I've done martial arts, I've done my own version of what I think is parkour way back in the day when I was just jumping over things. And I skateboarded, surfed, snowboarded, blah, 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 all these things to where, okay, in this instance, did I ever skateboard or snowboard in this? No, but I've fallen like this before, so I can totally relate to this by falling. I understand what this arm is doing and how it's weighting this person down. So when I'm looking at the stress of the shoulder, and I'm looking at the arm and I'm now seeing that it is straight, but it's also at a slight angle. You know, I can see that and I can feel it. I understand that the body is probably torquing in this direction as it's spinning in this direction. So there's a forward action taking place, and I'm going to be able to push that into the arm and bring more experiential line work and weight and all that other stuff to this drawing. I'm trying to become a part of the moment, if that makes any sense. So as I'm fleshing this out, I'm fleshing it out based upon what I've already seen and felt, knowing what I was doing with that picture. Now, the other arm is going to be somewhere right around in here. We don't see this one, but it isn't going to be in some random place. It's actually swinging with the rest of the body. So the shoulder, though, just needs to show that the arm is going back in space in that particular direction. So I have the framework laid out. Now I'm going to go into the areas that I don't see very easily, and that's going to be the leg work. And I'm going to try and figure out, like, okay, I see the thigh resting against the top of his shoulder over here, right along in here. So that means I have to lift up the leg a little. Here was my old line. Now I'm lifting it up a little bit higher. So it's resting against the top of the body. I know that both legs are kicked forward, so I'm not going to be building a gluteal crease. The gluteus, when a leg is forward, we have the gluteal fold here. And when a leg kicks back, the fold is going to do this because the leg cylinder is coming back and showing us the cylinder form. When the leg is kicked forward, the line goes like this because the gluteus maximus muscle, the largest muscle in the rear, goes from the back space here and comes down over here and attaches into where the iliotibial tract is and over at the vastus lateralis. So it's right around over here between the vastus lateralis and the bicep femoris. And that muscle, because it's a comma-like shape, the line of it becomes this line that we use to help dictate the movement of legs if we're showing somebody walking forward or walking away from us. So in both of these instances, the lines are going to be drawn and long and flat. They're not going to have a lot of curvature this way to them. And that's already sending the lines back in perspective. I have an ellipse started here. So I'll finish the ellipse out at the other end. And that gives me now the elliptical quality of the cylinder that the leg is. And so I'll backstep now and explain this thing that I'm drawing. This thing that I'm drawing is called the armature. Let me pull this up for just a second. And what I have done here with this armature, it's kind of a combination of the way that I feel about working with the figure and ways and methods of working from other artists. There's a lot of different artists here in the thing that I've created. Now, the armature, where this comes from, I don't know who the inventor was, but the first time I saw this was in a Walter Foster book, and it was an animator, and I'm now forgetting the name, which is really stupid because it's always in the back of my mind. But he had this potato sack thing where if you can animate the potato sack, and keep in mind with a potato sack, there's like these fold over corners to it on the ends, and these fold over corners basically act as the arms and the legs. And if you can animate this thing with these acting as the arms and the legs, you've basically animated the torso of the body or the human form. If you can make a potato sack move, you can make anything move as an animator, is basically the idea there. So I took that concept and I applied it to the human form as a realistic tool instead of it being an animation tool of bendy squishy. But that is also a part of it. And these four corner points here are actually bony landmarks. These corner points here and here represent the acromion process, which on your clavicle, the bone that you have in your collar area, the bicycle handlebars. The length of this is, and it turns in three different spaces. It has three slightly different movements to it. And at the very end, the back end of the bone has like a little lump on it. You can feel that in your shoulder. It's like the little tab in the middle of your arm cylinder, and it's raised up, and that's called your acromion process. And that's basically the very apex of your shoulder. The points down here and over here are the great trochanters, and those are your thigh bones, basically. Your thigh bone comes down like this. You have a neck and a sleeve that locks into the pelvis in here. This comes down as a shaft and becomes the rest of the bone. And this big giant bump over here is your hip bone for the most part. When you drop your arms to the sides of your body and you slap your arm against the side of your body, your wrist hits this bone and your elbow hits the bottom of your rib cage. So it hits both these landmarks. This crease in here is basically the bottom of your rib cage. Now, the pillow that we've designed here, or I've designed here, is the height of the rib cage. So it's all about finding this. This is equidistant to this if you look at the bottom of the rib cage and track it to the bottom of the body. The pelvis is not the height of all of this. So this bone set and this bone set are, like everything else in the body, a golden ratio of proportion to each other. But there's an empty space that sits in between. This is where your soft muscles are, and that's how you basically flex in any direction, is the softness of the muscles down here and the lack of bone mass in there that prevents movement or massive movement. And in this case, because there's a big space there, there's a major movement between these two bones. Now, inside of here, though, this is about 2/3 the height, and this pillow is not about this, it's about this. It's solving this. And altogether, this pillow shape and this armature is about solving a skeleton. And one of the things to keep in mind with animation, it's easy to take a shape and kind of like squish it and stretch it and get it from this state to this state, and it looks animated. However, when people walk, they also have structure to them. The bones are the structure. And in most animation, and as well in a lot of figure drawing, we tend to forget that there's a skeleton underneath, and we get seduced by all the curvy, lumpy things called muscles on top. And what I'm trying to draw here in the very beginning of the drawing is all about the bones and has nothing to do with muscles at all. And if I can get the bones to move and animate in the pose that I'm looking for, then I'm golden. All the stuff that I put on top of that is nothing more than a fancy detail, whether it be a big yoked dude or it's a skinny person. It doesn't matter. That's a detail now. We're going back to that word detail because I'm using it in a different context. And the detail is now the point of reference for the person that we're trying to draw. So the length of the arm now and this cylinder form that I'm drawing, knowing that the wrist will bump into this and the elbow will bump into this, it gives me landmarks for bones. And I know how to divide this shape up now into pieces. And there is a flub factor in here, I will say this. This is not absolutely true to the bottom of the pillow. The bottom of the pillow are these bones called the ischium bones underneath here. But for context and for motion and for tracking things for movement, this is going to be equidistant, making these look equidistant, and we're going to have to lift this and the wrist slightly though, to make everything really fit. And these are things, if you know them, you do that. You just go back in and say, okay, now that I'm done measuring, I can throw the measuring tools out and I can get proper, right? So these first lines we put down have nothing to do with the finish, but they have everything to do with the finish. They're the setup for it. They're putting all the pieces together. And once we have all the pieces assembled, this just becomes like, a coloring book. It's like background noise. I can forget all about it now, and I can start drawing my picture directly on top of it. And I've got the perfect guide to get me around where I need to go with my picture. And I have a surface that I can think over. right, and around. It's not just a circle anymore. Once I put this ellipse in right here, this is now helping me see around it. All of this dialogue is going to be important because when we go back to this character here and we turn this character in reference, we're going to need to think like this. So I'm prepping your thought process by kind of giving you a heads up on how we're going to do this. So in these cylinder forms now, I'm going to also put ellipses, and that's to help me track its angle in space. If I were to move this arm out and maybe move this arm out in this direction, and change these ellipses, it tells me very different stories about where these arms are in space. This one's now telling me it's moving forward towards the camera, while this one is telling me it's moving away from the camera. And so these ellipses give me context to how to decorate them with all of the information that's going to sit on top of them. And the width of these are the exact width of the bones that we draw with. So the humerus bone fits nicely between these two edges. The epicondyles of that bone fit over here and over here within the confines of that cylinder form that I've built. And then I can, sharpen up the lines, because remember, again, for demo purposes, we're blasting darkness into these things, but typically you would not want to go this dark, especially with a Prismacolor, because it'll never go away.
Hey, Ron, can you explain a little bit about your experience and understanding of this anatomy? So, obviously, everybody says kind of we should be doing life drawing to learn to get better at drawing a figure, but we're not going to learn the bones inside of the figure from life drawing. How is it that you know this, and does it really inform you that much? Is there some other resource we should be looking at to understand that?
Sure, that's a good question. Okay, so if you weren't born with this knowledge, then you can't draw. And that's just bottom. No, when you start with a figure, you start with the curious, right? You begin starting with just life drawing, and then you realize or recognize how good or bad you are at it. And the more you evolve with that life drawing stuff, the more you will come to need to know these things. Because if we look at a photo reference as an example, this one picture here, on the character who's down on the ground like this, and we look at his back, it looks like there's spirals in here and over in here. It looks like there's this noisy stuff in there. And if we don't know what that stuff is, we're not going to be able to manipulate it or draw it well enough to make a point that it's an arm that is in a certain position and has certain musculature, and the lighting is at a certain angle to help us see all of these things. We'll just guess at it, and we'll put in, to the best of our abilities, these little shapes that are shaded, and we'll try to draw those things, but it'll end up looking very difficult. It'll end up looking like all sorts of things that we just don't really recognize or understand as human. And because of this, you're gonna go into some kind of like catharsis where it's like, I can't draw figures anymore, I need to know more. And you're gonna either go buy the Bridgman book, because everybody on the forum says go buy Bridgman, and the Goldfinger book and all the other books, and look at them and totally get overwhelmed once you open them up, because it's like muscle, muscle, bone, muscle, muscle, and it's like, where do I begin? And you'll have to organize those thoughts. You'll have to break it down into a system to learn how to do this. And so a lot of art schools do have anatomy courses. And it's important that you take that. Just like if you're going to learn how to draw pictures, you need to take perspective. And I know everyone wants to duck out of perspective because it's that math class that you don't want to draw with. But it's this right here. This is perspective. There's math involved in this. There's calculations. There's volumes. And if I can't project in my mind that this is a volume coming forward towards me, all it's going to be are a bunch of lines drawn on the piece of paper. That's it. Nothing more. And I'm not going to be able to look at this and say, oh, yes, this over here is the front of the leg, and this right here is the back of the leg. I can feel that in my mind. Yeah, I can feel that. We're not going to see or feel that at all. That's going to be this thing where we look at some people and just go, I don't understand what the hell you're doing. That's like wizardry, and I don't get it. You have to understand that the body is in perspective. And then you have to have some, I think, basic perspective drawing. And basic perspective, I mean, without vanishing points and horizon lines, the ability to do draw throughs with your basic primitives, being able to draw cube forms and ellipses and cylinders and spheres. And spheres meaning that you can also put ellipses around them to create polar regions and divide it up into surfaces so that you can decorate it as such. This is the kind of perspective that you want to become familiar with if you're going to do this kind of work. And once you know these cylinders, there's still more to go, right? And it's gonna, and as we look at this, and here I'll just kind of fast forward ahead here, we know that the shoulder is a triangle-ish like thing like this. And we know that the arm comes off like this, and here's the torso and such. But it's also kind of good to know that there's a bone under there called the scapula, and that it has these articulation points, and that these articulation points are the places that muscles connect to. And that these articulation points also help us describe the local motion or the action of that space. Um, because once we start drawing these figures out, and we have to put all the shading on top of this to make sense of it and to make it look realistic, especially if we're being uh, hired to do realism. All of this information right underneath here is pertinent because it's how you see, okay, well, this is the teres major going forward underneath the arm. I'm going to put some ellipses around all these things. This is the infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major, supraspinatus, the humerus over here. And the shadow patterns fall on these things. Like you're going to get a shadow pattern along in here somewhere. It's going to be like a halftone some of the time cutting across this way. And then you're going to have a shadow pattern that falls down around this edge here. And then it's going to go down through here into the serratus muscles that come from this bone here. And you're going to have that. If the arm is drawn back this way towards us, then you're going to have a crease across here and across here. And there's all sorts of little tricks, like you can do the golden spiral in there and you can find where the skin creases and then put the shadow patterns in there exactly where they're supposed to go. But you need to know that. If you don't know that, then it's just this thing where there's these things, and I'm just trying to make these things kind of look like the photo, and I hope that it looks right. Does that look right? I don't know, and that's basically what we're going to end up doing a lot of the time. So all this knowledge of stuff right here is what helps make it work. So when you grid it out, and I'll do that here very quickly on the back. So we draw a line, actually, let's put the rib cage in this space. And then we'll draw a line across that and divide it in half because we know that the scapulas are roughly half the height of the rib cage. Now, I'm also going to be throwing out proportions and measurements, and it's like, well, why do I need to know all those things? This is just Trivial Pursuit, ain't it? Well, it is. It is Trivial Pursuit if you're going to play the art version of it, but it's also all the knowledge you're ever going to need to know when it comes to building a picture. So as I'm drawing this out, and I'm really getting confused by the reference because he's dark-skinned in a dark photograph, and I can't open the exposure up very much. Well, you go into what you know mode. And what you know mode helps you divide this stuff up into proportions. So as we know that when we look at the rib cage, if we divide it in half, both in the front and in the back, we get different points of reference. But we'll go in the back, the C7 to the 10th, 11th, and 12th rib, there's a height to that. We divide that equally in half, and that's exactly the height that we're going to need to work with our scapulas, as long as our scapulas stay the height of the rib cage. So that gives us a height to work with. Then we also know from these golden measurable points, and this is all coming from what you'll call the Greek ideal. I am Greek, but I'm not kind of claiming it. It's just where all this information comes from. And the information that we're using is teachable information, because if we don't put an ideal to these things, then there's absolutely no way that I can tell you, okay, this is roughly how long the length of the neck is going to be over and over again. It's just it's height, it's tall, it's like this, it's like you can't do that. You actually have to have a proportion and a measure to it if you're going to learn something about it. So we also take the width of this skull, draw lines down into the middle of the back, and the space that's between that roughly is the width of the back of the skull. Let me state all that. The width of the skull is roughly the space in between the scapulas. The height of the rib cage, half of the height of that, is going to give us this volume. So now we know this. And then if we know that this is the width of the head, and we know that we're going to draw Joe average and not Joe heroic. Joe heroic is 3 head widths wide. Joe average is 2.5 head widths wide. So then we kind of scale that down a little bit. And now that becomes the volume for the scapula. Now we kind of know how to put it inside the picture. So I have the rib cage here. I also know the scapular movements. This scapula right here is pulling back towards the camera, and that one's sliding forward away from the camera. So this one at a distance is going to be slightly further from the spine, and it's going to be pointing forward, while this one here is going to be slightly closer to the spine and pointing backward, back towards us. And these, again, are points of reference that I understand and I know from experience from using this tool, or also doing things and just looking at this and going, oh, yeah, I can totally see what he's doing. He's totally pulling his arm back like this. And also, because he has all of his weight on his arm, his scapula isn't going to be like perfectly perched right here. It's going to be shoved towards the spine because the weight of his body is going to cause that to happen. So this is closer and this is further away. Now, when I look at the picture, I see a whole bunch of light right here, right up against the spine, and it's very compressed. And that's telling me, oh yeah, that's where the edge of the spine is. There's also a little notch, a little triangle-like notch on it. And that's telling me where the corner of the deltoid and the trapezius muscle are overlapping the corner of the scapula. Now, again, if we go back into this mode of thinking about things, here's our scapula. Here's the design of it. There's a small triangle along the top of it for what you call the supraspinatus muscle. This is above this little thing right along in here, this little, I call it an on-ramp, so people can look at it that way because it's sort of like it goes uphill and it goes around the corner and then into the freeway of your collarbone. And so there's this shape right along in here, and then there's the infraspinatus that's down along in here. Now I'm only going to draw these two muscles to start off with because the dialogue is about this space right here. The trapezius muscle, which is sort of like your kite muscle on your back, is this big diamond-like shaped muscle back here. It comes off of the top of this trapezius, it goes down along through here, and then it anchors to the bottom of the rib cage and all along the spine along here. So all of the fibers of this muscle are aiming in this direction towards your spine. There's a small corner of this muscle that that goes over the top of this bone right here and crosses over this edge along in here. And the fibers that are attached down here are actually attached around this, what you call fascia. It's like leather. It's just like a piece of like hard leathery material. And we have that in certain places on our bones. Down at the base of this, we have fascia. And this is actually a much harder substance and a more adhesive substance that attaches to the base of the spine. The fibers attach as well, but this is what we really want. Once we tear that, that's a bad thing because it's really hard to anchor that again. But we have one right over here. This part of the trapezius muscle floats over the scapula. So this is basically free floating. And this little corner tab is holding it in place. And then when we go out the arm this way, we've got the deltoid muscle that attaches about halfway down the arm over here. And then it goes underneath this as well. And there's a corner piece here on it that's also fascia. So these two pieces of leather kind of like slide over the top of each other, and that's what helps give your arm a lot of motion and movement. And then the muscle head of the deltoid begins over here, clear of this one. So there's no overlap of either one of these muscles at all. So now with all of that being said, what I'm looking at over here in this picture is this little triangle of darkness right here. That's this thing right here. And that's now telling me of landmark, right? Because if this corner is going over the corner of the scapula right here, then I'm just basically looking for where it is along in here. Once I know where that triangle is, I look for the two directions of the triangle's shadow. And those two directions tell me something also about the angle of the scapula, because this is kind of right angle here. Not a true right angle, but pretty close to one. And you can use that as a right angle marker to kind of tell you, okay, the scapula is sort of at an angle this way, and it's sort of upward in this direction, like this. So the triangle now helps me anchor a bony landmark underneath there. The bone is what all the muscles are attached to. Knowing the bone is underneath there, I now have developed the skeleton, which then takes me back to this page. So when I'm building this thing, I'm looking for skeletal movement. That's all I'm looking for. So the length of the legs, when we look at those, and we bring it down to the foot, this half right here is the same as this half down here, so that tells me where to strike the bottom of the pose. The foot is nothing more than kind of a triangle facing forward towards us, but I'm looking for it at the height of the ankles, so I know where the ankles are. The height of this is 4 heads. 2 heads down to the knee, and the kneecap is within that 2 head unit of measure. And then below the 2 heads down to the floor is another 2 heads of measure. Heads going back up to the head unit on the body, right? And so now I have the width of this cylinder to build, and I find that through the width of the femur and then the width of the ankles. So knowing what the width of those are, and then here's the random, and this is where again you have to know your anatomy. If you can find the pubis, which is the line that divides the pubic hair from the rest of the skin above, the pubis will send and then go straight down the middle of the pubic line. That'll get you to where the ischiums are. The ischiums are your butt bones. These are the two curves that you sit on top of. These go back, and there's a big hole underneath there, and it's where all of your vascular comes down through into your leg. The middle of this pubis and right over here, the great trochanter, is the width starting point of the top of this leg cylinder. Then this comes down and matches the width of the femur. Then it comes down and matches the width of the ankles. So again, this is looking for skeletal mass. So these cylinders are not going to be active with a lot of curves, and they are not going to be very wide. They're going to be as narrow as the bones are. And once I know how to do this, basically this is a system for finding the skeleton. So now I can begin animating some drawings by just moving that thing around. Oh, and then the pillow, one other thing about the pillow, we have 4 different angles to look at this at, or 4 different actions to look at. We have point of reference, which is your standard, I'm standing here with my arms at my side doing nothing but just standing here. Then over here, we're leaning to the left, and then we're over here, we're leaning to the right, and then we're in profile. And profile is going to kind of look like what I just drew in with those 2 versions until I put the neck on all of these, and then the neck justifies kind of where we're looking. So with this one, the neck cylinder just basically comes up off of the pillow shape, which it reference our back is the bent thing and our front is the straight thing. When we lean forward, we basically flip this action and we go this way. We squish the front and we stretch the back. The neck is like this. So we have this way of moving the profile. Then we have the front view. In the front view, we've leaned it this way, we've leaned it this way, and we've kept it center spread. Now, when it's leaning this way, depending upon what the arm action is, I might also take this corner and stretch the corner out a little bit and aim it in the direction of the action. And I'm also going to think about these lines now. They're not just a line to draw, they're a line now to animate. And I'll do this whether it's fine art or whether it's illustration or whether it's animation. It doesn't matter. Because what I'm doing is akin to one of my favorite artists, Peter Paul Rubens. And Peter Paul Rubens was in many, many ways the very first animator that we can basically say, looking at his figures, that dude animated people. Before him, Michelangelo did, but it wasn't as good. It was a little bit stiffer. And Rubens' goal was to outdo his idol, which was Michelangelo. And I think he did a pretty good job surpassing him in so many different ways. But his figures were very lively. So for fine art, I look to him and say, hey, you know, he's doing it there. And there's no reason why you can't, especially if we look up to these old masters, and he's doing it. So we're going to animate our figures, and that's going to bring more life to them. So even if the person is just slightly leaned this way and maybe has their arm just lifted up a little bit, I'm still going to stretch this side out, because for me, what I'm doing is justifying what I'm going to do with all the information that sits over here. All of this information on this side of the figure is going to stretch, while all the information over on this side of the figure is going to compress. It's all going to suck inward into this little spot right here, while this is going to try and pull and repel as far away from each other as possible. So that means that even the design of the pectoralis muscle or the abs or the obliques are all going to have this more linear quality to them, where over here, I'm going to give everything a slight curve. The oblique over here is going to have a slight curve to it. There's going to be a curve in here in the pinch of the skin. And what I'm doing now is I'm repeating the same motif in every muscle on this side of the body, just like I'm repeating the same motif over here. And in this case, the motif is a thing that attributes to an action. And so in this case, things are values or lines. So all of my values, if I shade, the shading is going to be indicative of activity, or over here rather, activity. Where over here, the shading is going to be indicative of compression. I'm going to have a lot more weight in the shading, where over here is going to be a lot more air in the shading, right? So this has a little bit more movement to it in the line work, and this has a little bit more of that settled quality in the line work. And now I can bring in what we know to be physical attributes done as an artist to create a mental feeling. When you look at a picture, you do two things at the same time, or only one because the picture doesn't have the other. But you look at the picture and you appreciate the visuals for what they are, and you feel the picture mentally, and you appreciate what's being done within it. And if the art isn't convincing enough, then one of two or both of those attributes could be missing from the work, which is usually why a piece goes unnoticed because it's lacking some of these properties and qualities. So, what I'm doing here is in the line work, but it's in the line and the value and the color that you are going to feel the picture, if that makes sense at all. I know this is sort of like, I just wanted to learn basic figure drawing, and now whoop, we're going up into this high minded stuff. But that's basically what drawing is. You, at a certain level, you're going to pass through this. Okay, I'm done being symbolic about what I draw. It's a person. Yes, it's a person, but it's a person doing something, and I want them to do something. And that's when we have to also think about our approach using all of these different attributes of drawing and how these attributes can actually help us create a sensation and a feeling. The other artist that we can look at, because he has a lot of examples out there from his history, is Dean Cornwell. And Dean Cornwell was really big on pushing the volumes, but also making the volumes feel a certain way. And we can see in his shapes that he's I don't have a white chalk with me, but he uses his pencil with a certain quality of edge to it, and he's pushing these edges, because he's shading, but it's not just this is his technique for shading. He's actually pushing these shapes so he can feel them. Like here, we want to stretch this out a little bit, but over here we want to compress it even more. So we're going to get all the lines to feel like they're starting to take on some compression. Where over here, we're going to open the line work up and we're going to make it feel like it's taking on air. And we feel what's happening with these lines as they go from this side to this side. There's this sort of like, and it all of a sudden stops. And that's your brain feeling that stuff. If you kind of go along with the idea that pictures can make you feel. Because somebody who's completely devoid of any humanity in them could look at all of this stuff and just go, oh, that's a darker line than that one's a lighter line. And they just don't even notice that there's feeling at all in this. And there are people like that out there. But those who connect with things and actually feel within them will understand this as a language in itself. And this goes beyond when you first learn your basics. It's sort of the reason why when you hear of these apprenticeships with the old masters, it's like, Van Dyck was with Rubens for like 15 to 18 years of his career. And it's like, well, that was so much of his career he could have had for himself. Why was he there for so long? Well, in order to master something, you have to learn everything about it. And it takes a long time to get to this level of dialogue. When you don't understand this level of dialogue, none of this is even going to make any sense. But I'm bringing this to light today because I know that I'm also talking with some of you out there who are pros and advanced people. You do these things already for a living. And so I want to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of a dialogue, and it's not just a bunch of pros going, he's just talking about circles again, whatever. But there's something involved here, and we have to kind of think about that a little bit. So now we've got these pillow movements, both in profile and in front view. Even if it's a slight action, I'm still going to move this. And I just realized that on my stressed side or stretched side, I didn't have the stretched arm. I'm going to put this one down and bring this one up. Now everything feels right. All right, and over here, the same thing. I'm going to lift this arm up. And it's not that this body is moving this way because the arm is lifting up, but I'm going to do that just to make a point here. So as I lifted this line up, which was a very static line, and I pulled this one up in the air this way, it takes this one with it. At least in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. And that's how I'm able to peel this one upward and give it motion and movement and not just go, yeah, it's right here, and just kind of like just do something. This we can do. Anybody can do that, but that has no connection with what's going on. That's just telling us of two places in space and how they relate to each other. But this tells us what's going on, this line right here. So again, I go back to the armature, and I want the armature to feel active. I want the lines to feel like something in my armature. Like over here, I'm squishing the lines together. I'm bulging this outward. I'm bulging this outward in the same way that if you were to take a balloon and squish it down, the air is going to displace and push over to one side. That's what I'm trying to do here. So my lines now are not just Oh yeah, I draw a curve, I draw S's and straight lines, and I just do them at random. Every line I'm putting into this picture, I want it to behave a certain way. So a line coming down that's going around a corner, well, where's the corner? Is it right here? Is it right up here? Is it right here and right here? I'm thinking about that, and that's what changes the direction of the curve. It's not just a continuous curve. There's a curve with an attitude. It's a curve with an action. And that's what I'm trying to find. And that is, again, going to go back over here and attribute to the feeling part of it and not just the seeing part of it. Now, one more thing about this pillow, if I were to take 3 of them of this same sort and do the same exact thing with all 3 of these, but alter the center line to each one of these. So in this center line here, I'm going to do this. In this center line here, I'm going to do this. In this center line here, I'm going to do this. And in this one, we've got extreme torsion, right? This arm is going forward that way, and we can see a little bit of the back of their body. There's scapulas here and here. And this goes down into the base of the pelvis. And this is the front of the body, so we can see one leg over here and one leg back over this way. And that's how much twist and turn there is in that particular torso. Here's the crotch. Over here, S-curve. So this part of the body is facing this way while this part of the body is facing this way. And it's through here where the twisting is occurring. So these legs are like this over here. And in this one, these arms are over here like this. I hear Dan on the mic.
Yeah, yeah. You know, those are just fantastic little thumbnails, Ron. You make it look so easy. Can you tell me, do you start with the potato sack? If you're drawing a figure in an environment, do you work from the feet up, from the head down? Do you start at the center mass? How do you know how to place it into space, really? Where does your brain begin with the figure?
It begins right here. So if we go to the standard model of figure drawing, they say start with the head and use it as the measuring device for the rest of the figure. And that's good and all. And that's where we want to begin. Everything has a beginning point, and you should start there because there's a reason that they say start with this. But once you understand this, you need to activate the figure. And so now that we know that we need to activate the figure, one thing I am going to mention, and I've studied with Steve Houston, Glenn Vilpu, Glenn Orbick, Mark Westermo, and those are just a few, but everybody knows those guys. I also studied a little bit with Kevin Chen, but when he first started as a teacher, and it was cool because I think I was in his first class, and Paul Wee and all these guys, and Charles Hugh, we're all a part of the same cut. We're all from the same cut, basically. However, for me, I also studied the Riley technique. I studied figure construction, observation figure drawing, site size figure drawing. I've studied the whole gamut. And I pull from each of these what I think is the most valuable tool from them because some of them build on some weird redundancies and others build on things that I don't find very useful and practical in the very beginning. As an example, this is also considered like there's another method out there where we use we call it the kidney bean or the bean approach. And we use the 2 circles for the rib cage and the pelvis and then attach them to each other like this. And while I can do this myself because I understand perspective, the problem with this is that the 2 circles end up directly above and below each other. No matter how much you do this to both sides or do this to both sides, it's always going to be above and below each other, which is a perspective issue. So I like these corners on my pillow, and I like my pillows because I can measure with this. And so every figure drawing, I start with that center point and I work it out. What is the person doing? And then when I know how active the core of the figure is, then it makes it really easy to attribute all the other limbs now to the body because I understand what the activity is trying to be. So this is, for me, where I begin my figures. Although, like everybody else is supposed to do, I did starting with the head. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But when you start with this, just like the problem that I find with this bean-shaped thing, is that if I start with the head, our tendency is to be orderly, right? And if you don't know how to pitch an ellipse in different directions, like this, then every ellipse you draw is going to right itself and it's going to upright itself. So now I've drawn this head, even though the model's looking like this, and I put the neck underneath there, and then I put the torso in there, and I put the 2 circles directly above and below each other, even though the model's leaning this way, and it's static. So I begin here. I begin with this particular spot of the body and then build everything out from it. And you can get your proportions back and everything else. That's not a problem. Now, I know that it sounds strange to start at the middle of the figure. So when I do a drawing, the way that I'll begin is to strike the top and the bottom of my page with a light mark. So at least I kind of have a point of reference for how much space I'm going to be filling up with information. And then I'll find a center point for it. The center point's a really important one to find because this tells you enough about what's above and what's below to keep your proportions in check and balance. But there's another direction that's really equally important, and it's this way, knowing how wide it is from a center point so that you can keep your proportions in check and balance this way as well. So I try to do what I can to kind of like triangulate or to box in the space. This is going to go into what you call enveloping for a second. In my mind, I'm projecting this, which is what you would call a formal square unit of measure envelope. An envelope is actually, I'm just going to scrawl a figure here doing something. An envelope is something where you go from all the major points of extension on a figure and you tie them down with a string, so to speak. And this is the space that you fill in with the figure. That's your enveloping. This is a formal grid envelope. And this is how much square unit of measure a figure will take up. Let's say the figure is seated like this, and one leg is out this way. See their body now, this one foot is going to terminate out here against this. This foot, we'll drop this down just a little bit. This foot is going to end somewhere down along here, and it might just be the toe or the heel of the foot. Back in here, some part of the body will be touching. Up here, some part of the body will be touching. And that's our square unit of measure. So knowing the height and the width together will give me a better proportion to the figure that I'm trying to draw than if I just start with a stock circle and pillow shape and go from there. Although in every drawing, I kind of feel like I am because this isn't the person yet. This is just a template. But if I know the template is, say, broad and heroic, or they're kind of a little bit weighted at the bottom of their figure, I'm going to maybe start with a pillow shape that's indicative of the person. Maybe they're really, really tall and skinny, so I'm going to do the same thing. And this now goes into character design, because when we're character designing, we're basically doing nothing more than drawing the same figure over and over again. But how do you attribute character to each figure if they're going to have the same muscles and blah, 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 besides just the face? Well, the bodies are very much a place that you can do this as well. Like with this one here, what if we had a long upper and a short lower? That's the low belly buttoned person. We have a short upper and a long lower. That's the high belly buttoned person, right? But we're also just saying, well, you know what? This is just concept art, and who cares about proportions? What we need are individuals. And so I'm throwing out any logic behind where things land, and I'm just going to go for it and try all these different proportions until I get a difference in all of my characters. But that core is where to begin, in my opinion, because it's going to explain for you everything beyond that. And then once we have the cylinders in place, once we know where the cylinders are supposed to go, the nice thing is this is a two-step process. And the nice thing is then we kind of take all these different measures, these points of measure. So for each half of a length, we say, let's say this is the arm, and the hand is going to be somewhere down in here. We take each half and we divide each half into thirds. And dividing these into thirds now, there's a formula that goes along with this. Wherever there's a joint holding something together or onto something else, the mass is going to be larger because it has to sort of like, if this is the arm, it has to go around the arm to hold it in place. So it's going to have the most mass involved. And from there, I call this the bulk. And then from there, the muscle heads themselves stretch down towards the next limb. So this now are the muscles head down towards the next segment, and they start to taper. They start to taper inward towards the bones. And then we get to the lower third, and I call the lower third tendon. So we go from bulk, taper to tendon. And the bulk is the largest muscle, the taper is the long muscles, the tendon is the bone and tendons at the joint when it crosses over into the next segment. And so in our arm length, it's going to happen here at the elbow and up here at the shoulder. In the leg, it's going to happen in the hip, and it's going to happen right below the knee at the calf muscle. So we're going to have these bulkier spaces, and then everything is going to taper from there down into a tendinous mass. And kind of just looking at this, it already does start to feel like an arm or a leg, even though everything right now is perfectly balanced, and that's not the way we were built. But it gives the impression of musculature. So now on these cylinders, when I've drawn them in and I've divided them into their thirds, that makes it a lot easier for me to now go on top of this and say, okay, well, the forearm flexors are going to be right around in here. And up in here, the deltoid is going to be the massive muscle in here. And the bicep is really never going to compete with that. So it's going to be a little bit narrower in here. And it makes it easier now for me to template down where these muscles are going to go. At least in this initial impression, I can get an idea of the activity before I need to run away and get photo reference because I don't trust myself enough to put all these little details into the figure. And this gives me a good enough reference to also show the model and say, can you please hold this? Because they can see specifically all the little things you're doing because you're taking into account perspective and overlap. And even someone who cannot draw a picture can look at this and get an idea of what they need to do because you're giving them every clue of what they need to be able to see themselves.
So, are you typically designing your figure prior to a photo shoot?
Yes. Yeah, and that's a very easy thing to do because these go by, like these things can be drawn in just a few minutes. So I can design dozens of these within an hour session and look at all of them and go, okay, that one right there. And then pick that one up, put it into the illustration, and I can probably work with it up to a certain point. And then I might need to go and find a model, or I'll just go and pose one part of the body for myself with my own camera and just quickly shoot my arm or my leg in the same position if I can't go get a rep model. But a lot of my illustration work that I do and a lot of the paintings that I do, I don't use any models. I do all of this out of my head. And I keep it out of my head because the thing for me is, why did I learn this tool to invent if I'm going to keep using reference? And so I'm using this tool and continuing to invent out of my head. When I need a reference, it's for a specific person. When I need to paint, Brad Pitt because it needs to look like Brad Pitt, well, I'm going to use Brad Pitt's likeness. I'm not going to invent that. That's stupid. But as far as the pose goes, I don't need that person to draw this out. And I'd rather not, because for me, the best art that I've ever seen is the art that's inspired from the imagination more than what they've looked at. And so I want to obtain and retain as much of that from my imagination as possible and keep it in there and hold it in place as much as possible because I want the same feeling in my work that those art pieces have given me when I looked at those.
Cool. Just a couple more things real quick, Ron. Firstly, we're welcome to go as far over time as we want, but we're about halfway done right now, a little more. An hour's down, we started late. And we also have another question. Trying to accentuate that sense of gesture in your piece, do you actually draw out gesture lines when you start a figure? Or is that just something you kind of keep in your head to emphasize as you're drawing out things?
That's also a very good question. Let's just go back to this reference that I'm copying right now. We could decorate. So I split this into two modes of thinking. We have decorative art and we have active art. Just like we also have intellectual artists and physical artists. And if you overlap those theories of thinking, then you get an active artist with intellectual art. That's a really interesting combination. You can also get an active artist pushing animated art. And that's going to be really explosive art because both of those points kind of hit the same thing. It's all about motion and movement. There's a few Russian artists from back in the day that were absolutely explosive in their animation quality, and their pieces just came to life, where other artists are very decorative when you look at them. Kromskoy is very decorative, as opposed to Shishkin, who is very active in his dialogue. And so when I'm drawing all of this out, so I'll break this arm down as an example. We'll bring the humerus down here. I'm looking at the ridge muscles facing me, so that means that the epicondyles of the humerus are facing in perspective towards us. This is going to be foreshortened. I'm going to draw this up into the head of the humerus. Then we have let's see, the ulna bone is on the far side. So that means then that the ulna bone is here and the radius bone is parallel to that bone. And that means that the arm is pronated, not supinated. So I'll put the radius bone here, the ulna bone right here. And then we've got okay, so now we've got to put on the muscles. So we've got the deltoid that's going to come down to this little bump right here. It's going to come along here and drop down this way. Then it's going to come around the corner over here. And it's going to be in this space right here. This is trapezius muscle up here. The tricep comes off of the back of the scapula. And then the rest of it is attached to the linear division, the linear division straight down the middle of the bone on the humerus. And all of that swings outward this way towards us and then back towards the elbow. Then we have the bicep, and the bicep in this case is facing in the other direction. It's not facing towards us. And then directly below that is the brachialis in here. And then over off to the side over here, we have the ridge muscles. And those are your supination muscles, and those are aiming towards the thumb, which is on the inside of the arm. So this is spiraling down in the other direction around the arm towards the other side that we don't see. And then everything else along in here is extensor mass. The ulna bone along here becomes the division for the flexor mass, which is going to be over here. And so what I now have is a set of curves that I can work with. I can go down these sets of curves and I can decorate the muscles and make them very beautiful looking. I can, bring the curve of this out this way and then really think about the curve right here and the little tendon that comes back that makes this muscle look like a comma shape over here. And I can be very elegant about all of this stuff that I'm trying to draw. Or I can say, you know what, his arm is holding him up and all the lines of action are doing this. So this is going to do this. This is going to do this, this is going to do this, this is going to do this, and it changes the way and the attitude of the line work that I put into the picture. And now the lines actually feel like they're doing something where the lines before look like they were saying something, but not doing something, if that makes sense. And I'm saying something because that's the decorative way of thinking.
Yeah, that's nicely put. Thank you.
So yes, the gesture lines are going to remain in the drawing as much as possible, especially if I want this picture in motion. Now, I'm learning about all of these things in my career because I tell stories, right? So if we have somebody sitting next to somebody else and they're both basically sitting there, but one of them all of a sudden reaches his arm out to grab something on the table and the other one is putting their arm out on the table. They're both kind of doing the same action. The one who's putting his arm out on the table or her arm out on the table, I'll drop in the same exact template for the arm. I'll do all the same divisions. I'll put the thirds divisions in there. I'll figure out where all the muscles are going to go. Ridge muscle, triangle, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to decorate the one who's just putting his arm out. And I'm going to activate the one who is reaching out in a frenzy to grab the thing off of the table. And in the curves that are on this one, it's going to slow because curves tend to slow the eye down, especially when we make them more exaggerated, right? This curvy line is different from this curvy line, is different from this curvy line. These curves look like they're in motion. These are still in motion, but a little more decorative, and these are very decorative. So that means then when I'm drawing these lines that I'm thinking about the decorative quality, which means I'm going to do a little bit of curviness to them. I'm going to soften them up a little bit. I'm not going to give them the same punctual quality of force and movement. And then over here, I'm going to stretch these lines out, and I'm going to keep moving them as much as possible, because the moment I take this line and go like this, I've just stopped the movement. I've totally stopped the movement. And so I want to retain that. And the shadow pattern is going to do the same thing. The shadow pattern is also going to move with the action while over here. And this is a really interesting concept. English not good now. This is an interesting concept. If we talk about muscles on a body, so one thing I learned in academic art is that all muscles are convex. So that basically means this, that a muscle is like a capsule. And that means that every edge is kind of or every surface is kind of a bloated surface, but there's corners to those surfaces as they change direction. And the corners are not literal corners. It's just that there's an apex to it, and that apex creates kind of a cornering of the shape. And when we go to shade this, when we shade down like this is a capsule, right? And we're going to shade it that way. Well, this is a flank, and we're going to shade it this way. And so this is basically here how muscles work. We have fronts, sides, tops, bottoms, and so forth. And you call that a flanking muscle. And the shadow patterns that fall across the flank are convex. They are not concave. In fact, our body has not a single spot in it that creates a concave hollow. Where you have a concave hollow on your body might be because a certain muscle on one part is different scale than the other, and because of it, it drapes the skin between those muscles a little bit more concave than convex. But our body is made up of things that are filled with water. And when you fill something up with water, it builds outward this way. And that's what every single muscle is now. So every muscle is a flank. Right? And what makes them look concave in their shading is the little halftone that bridges the gap between the two. This little halftone happens to be a tonal transition that makes it look like it's doing this, but it is not doing that at all. So when you go to shade now, there's things to think about. Like if we draw two arms, with hands out here, thumbs, fingers, etc. And let's put the bicep on here. Let's put the ridge muscles on here. They're going to start up here on this bone and cross over towards the thumb. And then we've got all the extensor muscles that come down this way. We've got the elbow, and then we've got the flexor muscles that sit underneath here like this. And on the back, we've got the tricep. Deltoid comes down and sits right around in here on the arm. And this goes back up into the shoulder. Then we repeat the action again, right down along in here. And the thing is, this is all shape-based. So if I know my shapes, I'm just going to repeat the same shapes. And there should not be really much of a difference at all between this one arm and the other arm, other than, say, proportion. Maybe the proportion's a little different, but they should still both basically look the same. So now we have these. Now we want to shade these. We want to shade this one so it's decorative. So when we shade decoratively, we're going to go a little more concave. And we're going to do things like this. Actually, sorry, we're going to go convex. Hey, what am I doing? We're going to go convex. So we do this. This is going over the medial head. This is going over the lateral head. This is going over the lateral head of the tricep and then the long head of the tricep. Then we go down into the base of the ridge muscles, the base of the extensor muscles coming off of the epicondyle of the elbow. And then we go off of the tendon from the anconeus, come back around over here and lock back into the ulna bone again. And then we move across these muscle heads this way and then up and along this way through the tendons. So now what we've done is we've created the proper muscles. If we were at the École de Beau, Ong would be very happy for us doing this right now because we are being very exact to the human form. But if we wanted to go to Disney, Ong is getting kicked out of the house, right? We can't have Beauty anymore unless it's just Beauty and the Beast. We've got to get rid of all the decorative stuff except for backgrounds. Now we need action. We need action hero in motion. So now we go back to the one that isn't real. And we go to concave movement. And the concave movement now moves the limb in such a way that sends it in a direction. Where this is sending our eye up over the form to track the form and to track the beauty of each individual volume. This is sending us down the length of the form and sending us towards its active point of origin right over here. The hand is the point where everything is happening. And so now all of these muscles are kind of guiding our eye towards that. And they're all concave now. So shadow patterns are realistically like this. Shadow patterns are convex. And there's little halftones in between them that make them feel concave, but they're volumetric and they help us develop surface form. Where These down here are active shadow patterns, and these aren't creating surface form necessarily, although if you put a coarse shadow in the middle of them, and then you let everything else on the other side of it be reflected light, that reflected light can help enhance volume and can give you a little bit of volume while the line work that we're actually creating is justifying motion more than it is creating volume for your eye. And keep in mind also that the heavier something feels, the slower it's going to get. So we don't want a lot of this in here if we can help it. We only want a little bit, unless it's Iron Man and we need that reflective property, or Silver Surfer, we need that reflective property over there. We're probably going to also drown this out and put it into an almost even value no tan rather than having too much volume in it, because the more volume there is, the less movement there is.
Can you, we brought that word up before, no-tan lighting. Can you describe what that is, Ron?
Sure. So what no-tan is, if we think back to, say, Japanese screens from the 16th, 17th, 18th century, what they would do is they would draw two different things. They would draw things that were close to us low and things that were distant high. Then they would also draw everything flat in color. So the dark things might be the trees in the foreground, while the light things will be all the people in the middle ground, while all the really light things are the little things way up top that are supposed to represent background. And so the way that those Japanese screens were built were considered under the conditions of what you call light dark. You have light, dark. And that's what no-tan is the relationship between light, dark. Now, you also have volumetric drawing, which is the difference between light and shadow. And this has transition and gradation to it, but this does not. This is flat and posterized. The modern word for no-tan is posterized. So no-tan equals posterized. And in posterization, we know that we can go 5, 6, 7, 8 values of color in a poster. We can posterize it. No-tans can do the same thing, but the origin of no-tan is a two-step process. It's light and it's dark. So it's the light thing and it's the dark thing. But both of those things are flat things in relationship to each other. And this concept was brought over by Whistler and all of the, what was their movement called again? I forget. Their movement that Whistler was involved with brought over the influence of the Japanese screen and just Japanese art in general, Japanese culture, into this Western culture stuff. And so now we have this for the first time as a dialogue and an actual word that we can kind of identify with. Where before, I don't know what the word would have been that we would have used if there was a talk of posterization and keeping things flat, which I'm sure there was. But we don't know what that word was prior. But now we have the word no-tan. And then as we modernize and we become graphic in our state and we invent a whole industry of graphic design, then we invent this word called posterize. And posterize is basically no-tan. But I don't use posterize all the time because when I'm beginning, I want to check the balance between the light and the dark things. So my brain stays in no-tan mode to keep this light-dark balance in check. And then as I continue to flatten the whole illustration out into its spaces of color, I'm posterizing the spaces and I'm flattening them out so I can see the color relationships within each of the no-tan divisions. And then from there, I add volume to them and render them out. So it's going from a very flat thing to a very dimensional thing in the same way that this kind of armature structure, when we're drawing a figure, is all nothing more than just like paper cutouts, paper cutout rectangles, a paper cutout pillow shape, a paper cutout circle, a paper cutout rectangle. And then from there, when we put the ellipses on, that changes the paper cutout to something dimensional. It transforms it all of a sudden. If we keep this in mind, that this ellipse is actually trying to be an ellipse and it's not just a line that ended up curved by accident on the page. So even with drawing, we're starting with something very flat and we're working our way up towards dimensional. Shading is the same way. If you start it flat to begin with, it's easier to control how the light feels in the picture and how volume feels within each pictorial division of the space that you're working within.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so now with the shadow patterns, that's the decoration and that's the last part of the whole drawing. So now let's go back to this guy here.
Yeah, we might want to start thinking about actual. Like, this is all fantastic. It is 5 o'clock, Ron, just to keep
Okay.
track. And we are, like I said, you're welcome to go as long as you want.
Okay. But we started an hour late, right? So we still need to kind of make that last hour,
We
or
started half hour late. So
okay, okay. And where are we now? Are we about a half hour out?
technically there should be half hour if we were to keep on schedule, but we've had many people go 3 hours, so it's
Okay.
whatever you want.
Well, as long as everybody's okay, I'm going to keep going for a little bit just to resolve at least one of the problems that the demo was supposed to resolve. So we'll go there at least. All right, so now I'm putting in some landmarks as I'm drawing out the line work because I already have the structure of the armature and I've already kind of bastardized it by putting these muscles in here. I'm developing out now the rest of the armature plus the landmarks of the body. So what I did here was I threw in the sacral bumps, which are called the dimples of the sacrum, and that helps. What it basically does is it ends my, if you're all familiar with Steve Martin, he does a comedy routine with a rubber arrow that goes through his head and the rubber arrow bounces and wiggles. This is the rubber arrow, right? This thing moves everywhere. And the tailbone is the end of the arrow. So you're using the rubber arrow to dictate the direction and the movement of the figure. And then once I have that in place, I now have side-to-side division and I have linear flow. I know which way that the body is moving in space. Now going back out into these areas, what I'm doing is I'm developing the ellipses so I can kind of see their volumes, dividing the space up so I know where to divide it within the musculature. Then I'm bringing this leg back up because it is higher than the body, and then we've got the foot out here somewhere. And with the foot, just like the hands, there's a shorthand for this, no pun intended. The hands themselves are blocks. Wow, I'm getting deep here on the pages. The hands are blocks like this. And the fingers are out here like this. So all of our fingertips kind of point towards a center point somewhere, probably 3 hand lengths out in front of our hand or 2 hand lengths out in front of our hand. So all of our fingers taper inward. That's in its reference point. And then this back in here, the wrist is narrow and the knuckle line is wide. And then the thumb is on either side of that, depending on which hand we're working with, and then the thumb cylinder. So the hand has a bit of a taper to it. Now, when a hand has a crazy gesture to it, let's say the arm is coming out this way, and the thumb is out like this, the fingers are all like maybe like this in totally different positions. This one's foreshortened coming towards us, and then away from us, and so forth. What we do is we create an envelope that isolates the action of this space at the end of this cylinder. And then later we come back in and we put in this block. And then I usually start with the index finger because that's a good division for where the thumb is going to go on the other side of it. And then how to figure out the mass for all the other fingers. But that's the enveloping. And then with a foot, if we look at the foot in profile, it's a door stop. Remember those rubber door stops that you put underneath your door to keep it from moving? All 3 points on the door stop are important points. We have the heel, the back of the triangle. We have the toes, the front of the triangle. We have the arch of the foot that's favored towards the back of the doorstop. The apex of the curve is at the high point of the doorstop. And then directly above that, we have the ankles that are part of the lower leg bones. And so that in perspective is just doubling up the shape twice, and that's the foot. And then we know that this is the breaking point for the bend in the foot. So if the foot is pointed downward, first we'll draw the whole thing, cut the point where the toes are bending, take this triangle and replace it here. And now we've got the foot with the toes bent. And this right along in here is a fixed point. The arch goes across like this up to the heel. And we've got our foot division back in there. Leg is ready to go, blah, blah, blah. So I'm using those basic shapes now over here with the foot. And over here, the bottom of the door wedge, which I'm basically looking at the flatness of it that would be sitting on the ground plane. And then I'll elevate it slightly towards the ankle. And then I'm going to do a draw through on that so I can see the whole volume. That way I can, wrap my mind around the idea that this has dimension to it. Because if I don't add those extra things and it's just a flat cutout like this one is over here, I actually am going to treat it that way. So even with this one, I'm going to double the lines up because there is perspective involved and I need to remind myself of that. Head shape is right around in here. So now we kind of know the position of all these shapes. Now, very quickly, let's take this and with a different color, I'm going to map out the muscles. Because again, remember, I was saying something to the effect that this is a process for being able to put things together. So here's the latissimus muscle. That goes up into the armpit. This goes in the armpit this way. We have the oblique over here that's squishing in this space. And that goes up to the 12th rib. Then we have the oblique over here, which is stretching out this way. Then coming back up in here, we have the trapezius muscle. The beginning point of it is right here. Then we bring this down along the shoulders, top edge here, over this way, top edge is over here. This goes over the corners of both scapulars. This comes down into the small of the back. So now we have the trapezius designed on the back. Then in each shoulder, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major, infraspinatus, teres minor, teres major. Now we have the shoulders blocked out. Gluteus medius.
Are you even looking at your reference anymore, Ron, or this is all just intuitive for you at this point?
This is intuitive. The reference is on a computer over that way that I have to turn around and look at.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, I don't have any reference anywhere near me right now. Everything else is just basically going off of what's going on here and what I know. The only thing that I don't know at this point is whether or not the rhomboid is affecting this space in here. And if it is, which it doesn't, oh yeah, it is. It's affecting it right over here. So I need the rhomboid line in there because this is also pulling this way around the serratus muscles, which are in here, and the serratus muscles, which are over in here. And that's also another lumpy division on the back, and that's why I'm stating that one particular thing. Now coming up over here, we've got the vastus lateralis, which is coming off of this point right here, and that's going to cover, it looks like by the way that the leg is turned, it's going to cover most of the mass right around in here. So this is the side of the leg turned inward towards his body a lot more. This is the vastus lateralis. And then what we're seeing here is the bicep femoris right along in here and the semitendinosus and membranosus, which is over here. And those are your hamstring muscles. And the gluteus muscle is stretching over in this direction. So this is stretching and interlocking here. This is coming out and stretching from over here, and so is this. So these are going to be really long and stretched out at this point. This is going to be bulky. So we'll have this, this, and this right over here. And then we have this split right here for the calf muscle group. We've got the calf muscle group, and it looks like, yeah, because his leg is in profile, that we're going to be seeing the fibula here, and then the fibula comes up this way. And so because of that, here's the peroneus longus and brevis. So in front of that is the extensor, and then the tibialis anterior. Behind that is the gastrocnemius, and then the soleus right along in here. Put the tendon down into the ankle, and then put some kind of subdivisions along there so we know where all those muscles are going to be. And then if he didn't have a gi on, I could shade all of this, but at the same time, along with the pants, I can see the shadow pattern line, and it is falling over the calf muscle group right here, and then into the tendon of the Achilles heel right along in here. So we've got that as a rhythm for the shadow pattern inside of the pants. Now going over to this side, it's the same thing. We've got semitendinosus and membranosus here. We've got the bicep femoris right along in here. I can see the fibula here, so that tells me where the bicep femoris is attaching. And then back in here, we have the gastrocnemius and the soleus. We draw both of those out like this and put some curve to it so it has the perspective of the leg in mind. And then the gastrocnemius, or the soleus, is here just behind that. And I don't see the foot. Well, actually, I'm seeing the outside edge of the leg over here. So that means we're going to see the peroneus longus and brevis, the extensors, and then the shin bone muscle. And so that's all the muscles for over in there. We've already got that arm solved. So we basically have all the muscles resolved now. We've got the position of the body. We have the muscles resolved. Now it's time to rotate this position. And this is where I need to kind of come back to some of my earlier dialogue and the reason why I had to prime this dialogue with other bits of information. So we go back to this whole elliptical thing. And what I'm doing on the ground plane is this. So in my mind now, I have to see the big lazy Susan on the ground. And I'm going to put the lines of perspective at an angle so you can understand that this is a thing that's in perspective. I'll also put a square around it so you can kind of see it in perspective, right? And so that's my ground plane. Now, when I'm doing this from reference and I need the reference to do a totally different thing, this is going on in my head. I basically have a big lazy Susan. I have a puppet that's sitting over the top of that, and then in my mind I can rotate the puppet in any direction, and I can get it to whatever angle I need, and then from there I draw it out. And this one now is inspired from this guy. So if we were to draw that big ellipse underneath him here, his hand is the center point for that ellipse. Basically, I'm going to look at this ellipse as his body is going in that direction in the ellipse. This leg is somewhere over this way. This leg is going to go back over here this way somewhere. And this is all coming from this point of reference right here. So now if I were to draw this as a circle, I've got my center point here, dividing it like this, and all the information of this kick is going to go in this direction off on my Lazy Susan. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but what I'm trying to do is take this and go from this point of view to flatten it out like this so I can see it like that as a map.
Yeah, so if we were looking at it, an aerial perspective is just kind of a stick diagram. That's where most of the action plots out on there.
Correct.
So I tend to think of the same thing when I'm sketching. I tend to think of weirdly a diorama in my head where I have characters and I move a camera 360 around and up and down. And I have trouble sometimes conveying that to my students. I think a lot of times students don't think that dimensionally. Is there anything you do in particular? Is that just a skill you've always had? Is it something that was a result of doing this? Or do I myself actually build real models, which I think has enhanced that ability for me? Is there anything you'd recommend?
I've worked with the real models thing too. That was fun, but the problem was I had too much fun building things, and then I was away from my illustration too long. And so I totally agree with you. And the way that I kind of look at this is it's kind of like this. In our mind, we have this camera, and we have filters, right? You can put filters on your lens. And when we get this camera, basically it has no lens on it. That's how everybody walks around. They walk around with their eyes open, but not responsive to things. And they're not shooting photos in their mind and remembering things the way we're going to. So we're already aware that we have a camera in our mind. And then each class we take is a lens, and we learn how to like switch lenses. And so like perspective has a lens to it. Color theory has a lens to it. Figure drawing has a lens to it. All of these different attributes of art have a lens that you begin to build. And as you begin to develop this, and I can tell you, there's also some artists that can't do this. One of the teachers that I studied from, Glenn Orbick, who was a fantastic artist, would not draw a single thing unless he had reference out in front of him, because he in his own mind didn't believe that this existed. So he needed to see it to draw it, which is really crazy because when you look at his paintings, it doesn't look that way. It kind of looks like he's inventing a little bit, but that's the flourish of the brushstroke. But I believe we do have one of these, and for each thing you learn, you build one of these. And then when you have this, so let's say we have figure drawing. Well, we get our figure drawing lens. Now we put it on, but we don't know how to use it. So the lens is always going out of focus. The aperture is always off, and we're constantly fiddling with it, trying to get it right. Every now and again, we get it in focus and we do one right. That's when you kind of do one of these correctly, and then you go back to screwing them up again. As we get better at that, we're basically taking the fog off of the lens, and we're now learning how to use the dials. And now as we get more and more involved, we are a camera, and everything is going through the lenses now. And that's basically, that's my analogy for it. And I believe that that's kind of how we evolve a little bit, is that we really do need to trust the imagination more than we do, but we tend not to, because we need something grounded for ourselves most of the time.
That's a really nice way of putting it, Ron. Yeah, I think once you're aware of something, it's easier to spot it. But yeah, it is a little bit like this filter you put in. You just kind of get your brain in that mode to start recognizing it.
Totally, totally. Okay, so now I'm going to take that letter T, right? It's this thing right here. It's this right here. I'm going to take that, and I'm rotating it inside of my circle to a totally different position. Now, the scary part about this is that I'm not doing one with feet. One of the other references that I sent all of you, I practiced with earlier, and this is why I didn't bother using it, because once I solved the problem, it's solved in my mind, and I don't want to do it anymore. So this is the pose. It's some dude with two knives, and he's like sneaking towards the camera. It's a really dark photo. And this was the reinvention. And then this was an aerial top-down view of the same pose. And this is just something as an exercise that I did for myself, because I had to get in tune with this process, right? Because this isn't something that's just like, oh yeah, I sit down and I just kind of reinvent things as I go. You got to warm up to everything, no matter how how much you know how to do something, you still have a warm up period. And so that's what this was right here. But you can kind of see if you have the photo reference, then you can relate to this image right here because that's the reference. Here's the one arm up over the other one here, and the knife is down here, and the knife is out over here. And then here it is turned around. And I started with footprints. So I started with this on the ground, and I started with this right behind it, which is what I found over here first, this and this. Or not first, but ultimately I found this in the end. And this right here told me how to start this right here. That's the footprint. Once I know where the footprint is, everything else is built up from that. So then I go to the lower legs, then I go to the upper legs, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's the torso. And then I put that in and everything else just happens. And then there's adjustments to be made to it. But that footprint was found so that I could take that footprint and turn it and then begin building from there. Because if we don't have one single solid logical point of reference to begin from, then every one of these are a total guess. And tendency is to make each pose a little bit different each time you draw it because you're not in point reference with everything that you're working with. So like with these things, I know like I drew arrows in here. I tried to draw them to make them visible, but they aren't that visible. So when I started the pillow, it's this shoulder and then this shoulder, trying to figure out the shoulder tilt. So then when I get over here, I know that that arm is up and that one is down. Actually, the other way around. I know that one is up and that one is down. So this shoulder should be a little bit higher. Now I'm making an adjustment to my drawing, which I should have done earlier, but that's even stronger to this reference now than without that triangle over there. But knowing each of these things, this is an angle. So it told me, dude, make the shoulders more angled. Over here, this is almost level. So if this hip went up, then I'm off. And I know that. Then all of these things are just a matter of bringing back in focus what happened here when I solved it over here and how I got down to it. And these are, I'm trying to explain to myself out loud to help all of you understand what the hell I was thinking about when I drew that. Because there are some things I'm thinking about, I just don't know what they are at that time until I kind of do that, and then I can walk you back through it. So now the arm is the anchor. Here's the arm. It's the only thing we know. And I didn't solve the hand, which is really bad of me because that's the footprint. So I do need to go back here and solve this. This hand is facing out in this direction. So this hand is this way to these things this way. So now I've got to figure that out. And that is this way. So the hand is facing in that direction. So there's the hand. And then the arm comes up through here. Then we've got the torso, and the torso is going to be curving uphill this way. And then we've got the shoulder line that's almost vertical with the arm. And we've got the hip line, which is this way, to the shoulder line, which is this way. So that's the angle now that I need to remind myself of here. Shoulders going up this way, hips are going back in like this.
Just to clarify for anybody who can't envision it yet, we're going to be looking at the front of this figure now, correct? At about roughly the same eye level?
Correct. Okay. Actually, a little higher up than the last one, but yes. All right, so here's the torso now. It's not as active as this one yet, but I've got to put a few other pieces in here before I kind of like go off completely. My center line is curving this way, and that basically means it's coming towards me like this, but upward. And then so I'm seeing the underside of the body right here. So now I'm going to put some dimension into the pillow just so I can see it in 3 dimensions rather than 2. So that just basically means doubling up the pillow shape so I can see it as a pillow block now instead of it just being a flat cutout. The head is up at an angle like this. This shoulder is forward somewhere this way. The arm is out in this direction. And so is the leg. The leg is resting against the side of the body and then out this way. The foot is over here in profile. So over here, let's see, it's going to be like this. It's going to be this way. All right, so that foot we've solved now for the most part. We know what's going on over there. The knee is here somewhere. The hip is right in here within the pillow shape. And then the other leg is back, or it's forward, but let's see. Here's the opening. Here's the knee here. Yeah, it's just a little to the left of the body. So again, now what I'm doing is this. I'm looking at this is the corner of the pillow, and then I'm looking to the right of it to see how far away the knee is from the corner of the pillow. And then coming back over here and saying, okay, here's the knee. It's a big distance right there. I'm going to move this back over here. That's a shorter distance, getting closer, maybe right there. All right, so now there's the cylinder coming forward like this, and then here's the cylinder going back this way, and that's also up, but below this leg. So right now I've got it drawn, that foot is below it. So I need to replace this circle here to change the elevation, put the foot up here, and then draw the foot back in this direction. So now I'm gonna go over the top of all of this really quickly and redraw everything. So the leg is through here. Let's change colors also. Go blue, yeah. All right, so this gluteus muscle is here. This one is a little bit higher over here. We've got the crotch. We need to think about that so I can split the legs better. This cylinder comes forward this way. Then the leg is bent in this direction. So I'm going to bend it slightly, a little bit more than I had before, because right now it doesn't have enough of a bend in it. The bottom of the footprint, the side of the torso, and the arm coming forward towards that, somewhere up this way, because it's out of our view entirely. So I'm assuming that it's somewhere right around here. Then we've got the head back here, the dude's chin somewhere right here, his neck and his pit of his neck, the shoulder. I'm going to draw the deltoid in there because I want to be able to see the shoulder mass. Across the pectoralis muscles, into the rib cage, and then the stretch between the rib cage and the hips. Then the arm down this way with a slight curve to it and a slight angle this way to it. The hand out this way. The thumb is going in this direction. The other fingers are spread out through here. The elbow is somewhere right around in here. The middle of the hip is somewhere right around in here. The iliac crests are somewhere here. The center line of his body is up through here. And then we've got this leg here. The kneecap is somewhere out here. This goes in back away from us. And then the heel of the foot, the side plane of the foot, the top of the foot. So now we've got the pose kind of worked out, right? I've got it in a new position. And now from here, it goes into the next mode of thinking, which is to adapt the muscles. So we know that the bicep is facing forward more along in here. So we have that volume here. And we're going to go into the forearm flexor group, the ridge muscle, the ridge muscle group. See, that's what I was saying. I'm probably going to snap pencils here. Please have another pencil. We'll go to this. Break. Ridge muscles here. Deltoid, tricep, coracobrachialis, tricep, pectoralis muscles, into the abdominal wall. In the abdominal wall now, we're going to go down to the base of the rib cage. 10th rib, we're going to kick the 10th rib up and over to the other side. We're going to bring this down and then find the abdominal tract, which is going to come through like this and like this. Close that down along here. Lower abs, navel, mid abs, and then the division of the two upper abs right along in there. The serratus muscles along here, then the latissimus muscle along here. This side, we don't need to worry about any of that because the leg is in the way. Gluteus maximus is coming around like this and is filling in this space here, filling in this space over here. We got the crotch, and then we've got the hamstring group over here, the adductor group through here, calf muscle group here. And basically this is now where, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way says to use ellipses, and you draw little footballs for muscles and all that. I'm not drawing these for the muscles. I'm drawing them for the placeholder shape. I want this group of muscles to be right around in here. I want this group of muscles to be roughly within the confines of this space in here. And the gluteus muscle is going to come down, obviously, and cover part of that up. And then as these stretch forward, I want the calf muscle group to be somewhere right around in here. So it's giving me context to just basically where to put the muscles once I start blocking them all out. Coming down through here, we've got the deltoid coming up and splits right through here. The pectoralis that's going to be along in here. Sternocostal portion, or I mean the clavicular portion, sternocostal portion, abdominal portion. So now we have all of the different striations for each of the different segments within the pectoralis. Cross here, cross here, cross here, cross here, through here. And then we continue those striations down through in the fibers of the other muscles and so forth. We got the kneecap here. We got the, let's see, vastus medialis right along in here. Let's see that. Yeah, there we go. So the sartorius is along here, comes down and attaches through here, creates one half of this banding in the knee. Then we have the bicep femoris over here that creates the other half of the banding, sort of. And then the semitendinosus right here. Then we split that. So we've got both of those muscles split up. And then the vastus lateralis over there. So we got vastus medialis, vastus lateralis, hamstring group, gluteus group, and then we've got the split in here for the calf muscles. And I believe we were seeing more of the calf muscle group to the outside that way. So we're not going to be seeing as much of it over here. It's going to be favoring this muscle head, and the other one is in perspective behind the leg. So then in here we've got the gastrocnemius, and then the soleus just behind that, right along in here. And then the flexor digitorum right along in here into the arch of the foot. So there's our division of leg muscles over here. And these go around like this and like this. And then we go into the shin bone and a bit of the peroneus longus or the tibialis anterior that's slightly hinted at over here. And then the arch of the foot, the heel of the foot, the toe block of the foot, big toe separated out from all the other toes. And then the big toe here with all the other toes there. So there's the foot design if we need to have all the other textures involved with it.
Since you're on that foot there, I noticed you drew the arch. Do you only draw the arch on one side and it's a straight line on the other typically?
Yep, because the outside of your foot is flat. So the outside is flat, the inside is arched like this. And so this is going to be where all the height is. We're over here. If we don't have, unless his foot is totally hyperextended like this, we need that line over there to be almost straight because it's a line of action. Where over here, the lines are bending and curving and turning. So this over here is telling us about volumes, but this over here is telling us about movement. So I need this line to stay continuous and uninterrupted as well for the movement to stay genuine.
Fantastic, thanks.
And then there's the line up here as well that I'm going to keep a lot flatter so that it keeps all the noise contained within. So now here's something to keep in mind, like I think Phil Hale, he's a painter, he's an amazing painter, and his Johnny Badhair series is a good way of knowing this or looking at this, because this is where I first noticed it. When I was taking life drawing, we would also draw draped clothed figures and so forth. And in drapery, you kind of know that folds are pipes, right? And that they create triangular spaces in between the pipes because folds are usually point of reference to point of reference, two tension points with a little bit of looseness in between, and that looseness falls with gravity. It creates a triangle. So we have pipe folds and triangles. And we get super caught up in this, and we make all these amazing details, and it looks really great on the inside, but the outside looks like an aluminum can that's just been beat to hell and driven over by 17 cars. And what we need to really be able to do is straighten out those outside edges. Maybe every now and again put one little fold that breaks the line, because we don't want continuous lines either. That's a little bit monotonous. But a little bit of a fold every now and again that breaks the line. And then you can go crazy on the inside here. As long as the outsides remain calm, everything will still work out. And why I say look at Phil Hale's Johnny Badhair, it's where I noticed this first. I was really caught up in making all of my figures for all of my comics and illustrations and everything have every articulated point really noticeable. And what I felt like was my pictures were becoming really noisy and busy because I was spending too much time on the details and making the details super articulated. And I didn't know what to do, so I started looking at artists I admired, and Phil Hale was the one who I noticed the simplicity of the folds. And then I started noticing it in other artists. And so he kind of introduced me to it, but I think he introduced me to it because it's so obvious in his work, or you don't notice it as much in Rockwell and Cornwell, even though they do it. You notice it more with him because he was at one point doing comic books, and comic books being graphic the way they are, you sort of take some liberties in those graphic tendencies or in those times, and you create graphic tendencies for yourself that will fit with your work for the rest of your career. And Phil still does that with his fine art, but he's a little more fine art related now, or relatable to it with his work, rather than it being so illustrative. And because of that, a lot of his illustration ideas and concepts aren't as present in his fine art, although the stuff with the folds and a few other motifs that he created from comics still do exist in there. They're just not as noticeable anymore. All right, so I've divided all of my muscle groups now. I've got my adductors in here. I've got my vastus medialis. I've got my rectus femoris right across the top up here. I've got all of the muscles that I need except for the arm muscles here. Bicep here, brachialis here, coracobrachialis here, latissimus inserting into that there, tricep here, pronator teres, forearm flexors, and then the ridge muscles that go down towards the thumb, and all of these go into the wrist right along in here. So now I have everything divided up. So if I needed to start working with shadow patterns, I would know where to place them because I can see all the muscular divisions, and I can start inventing off of that if I needed to. So no,
Do you always draw these muscular divisions, or do you, like, if this was ultimately going to be a painting, would you just kind of draw the contours because you can envision these muscles, or do you actually break it down like this is part of your process every time?
No, this is definitely for show, for the purpose of teaching. When I'm drawing it out, I'll look for this, and probably this, and then the straight lines in between. But I probably will have mapped some of these things out to find where those exist. They just won't be to this extent.
hmm So, do you kind of have a cruder landmark method that you do in your head a little bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if I were to draw this figure out, it would have been nothing more than say, oops. It would probably be something like this, because now I'm going to inject a whole bunch of my own thinking into it, and reinvent as I go. So this leg might go up a little higher because I need to see his face in the illustration at this angle. And I'm gonna take some liberties now while it's in this really hazy mess of a state. But that's what I was also going to mention is, like in quick sketch, when you're first laying in the sketch, you got to do whatever it takes for you to be able to see the space. And if you don't know how to envision it in line, I would do it whatever way you have to. And that's what I'm doing here, is whatever way I have to. Scribbles. And then I can take the scribbles and I can reformat the scribbles, and I can find the deliberate on top of the unintentional. But it's even in those scribbles, I have an informed direction I'm going in. I know something about the kind of pose that I'm about to take on. The other thing that I would also do in here is I would make sure that I have divisions like this, just so I can kind of see things in space. But that's honestly about how crude my sketches are going to start. They start very, very, very loose. Nothing like what I teach at all. In fact, it was scary for me to become a teacher because I know that in my state of just being this, I just draw like however, and I don't really think about it at all. But when I have to kind of inform people of what I'm doing here, then it's like, oh, geez, okay, well, there's this thing in here, and it fits into a space, you know. And so this is what I teach like, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what I'm going to draw like. Now, in my sketchbooks, they're all over the place. There could be some sketches like this. There could be some sketches like this. Or there could be some finishes. My sketchbook is just a place for me to remind my brain that I can still do picture making, and that my hand still needs to practice and do functional exercises and all of that. And then sometimes my sketchbook is a place for note taking, and then sometimes it's a place for finishes. But in whatever instance I'm drawing in, my brain knows what to shove away and then what to bring out. So it's like, if we think about this in the art in some sort of like weird symbolic way, we've got this is in our brain right here. It's a toolbox, right? And then inside that toolbox is a whole bunch of tools. that we're exercising, and we put them inside of there. And as we learn a new tool, we throw it in the toolbox. Then when I go to make a picture, I break open the toolbox and I pull out the one or two tools I need, and I throw everything else back in the toolbox and put it away. Because the more chatter I have in my brain, the less I'm going to be able to do that right there. This requires clarity, although I don't know how I did this talking to all of you, because that's not clear. But I think because there's a little bit of autopilot going on here, that I can probably repeat myself pretty easily without having to think too deeply. But if we were to have to measure these out absolute from one to the other, then there would be a lot more silence on my end for sure, because there's more calculating that has to happen. So let's see. Where are we at with time?
Technically, we just hit our 2-hour mark. We're thereabout.
Oh,
So
well,
this is all bonus.
Okay, so yeah, I could just, well, let me just do this really quickly, okay? Because I did the figure, but I want you to know that there is also a set of these shapes for the head, and that you do a division of, again, we're going back into these classical divisions. So here we have thirds now, and I'm dividing this on the side, and then I'm taking each of these thirds and I'm placing specific information within them. So this was the zoom up that I didn't get a chance to do, which is perfectly fine, because this stuff is probably just, it's added noise to all the other stuff that you're probably going, what did he just
this is amazing. I'd also, if you don't mind, I'd like to bother you. I'd love to see just sort of, for those of us that don't know all these muscles, just a crude mannequin that's maybe cylinders that just, again, describes head to toe kind of proportions, what you're looking for in a very rudimentary way.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the cool thing about this, what I wanted to show is this. We have all of these divisions, and we have this one over here, which is the key for everything you're going to do from this point forward. Ears, if you didn't love them before, you're going to have to learn how to love them now, because they'll help you with everything. So in 3/4 view and profile heads, the skull that we're going to be working with is mostly an oblong shape like this. We have an oval up here, and we have an oval towards the front. This is our face plane, and this is our cranial mass right here. So we have this triangle. Now, if I populate a page with triangles of this sort, first of all, I'm learning how to draw a shape and repeating myself over and over again. So there's one exercise out of the way. The second is association with volumes, and I'm kind of getting that out of the way with keeping the necks the same size through here. Capping the necks off with ellipses, so I'm learning a little perspective. There's another exercise. And then I'm going to place ears. So I'm going to place this ear here. I'm going to place this one 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 right here, and I'm probably going to end up repeating myself a little here, but and then this one right here. Now the neat thing is, wherever you place the ear, the whole head follows. So in this case here, we're looking up at the skull. And here's the chin underneath here. We're looking up pretty extreme. Over here, we're looking down at the skull. We can see all the overlapping shapes. Here, we're looking at the back of the skull. So we can add another ear over here and then continue the chin out this way. Over here, we're kind of looking slightly up at the skull. We can kind of see a little bit on the underside there, but not very much of it. Here we're looking down and behind the skull. So we can block out the eye socket there and such. And then here we're kind of looking down and at him in profile, or her in profile. And so just the ear placement from this shape language, that was cool, because when I was doing this over and over and over and over again, it's like, okay, I'm going to wear myself out with all these lines. And then I just started playing with one shape, and all of a sudden I found this. And it was like, oh my God, no way. This ear thing totally steers you around. So if you don't know what you're doing with your figures, and you don't know exactly what kind of position you want to put the head into the body, here's a way of kind of shorthanding it. You just kind of draw this and then just place the ear. You don't have to do anything else yet. And you should be able to see how that head looks in relationship to the body. All right, now the body. That quick, simple mannequin. Head to toe, dividing the figure in half, checking those proportions, looking to see if this is 4 heads tall. It should be 4 heads. So you check this, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's our proportions. The torso is up here, pillow shape. Now, torso to head, rib cage to head. Rib cage is, or the head to the rib cage is roughly 2/3 the height of the rib cage. So now with that also being said, another measure that we can think about, if we take this space here and divide it into thirds, head and neck, rib cage and pelvis are equally a third division each, equidivision, equidistant to each other in the ideal human being, and then whatever proportion you need to make them for whatever character you're building. Legs come down here, foot is at the bottom here. We're going to use just a simple triangle forward for the foot. And I'm going to put the other one in profile, so we use the whole door wedge to show it here. And this is very fast and very crude, so I apologize for the messy line work. All right, so there we have the body. Now there's different ways of measuring the body. Let's put on the trapezius muscle, which in the front, the trapezius muscle is nothing more than a coat hanger. Remember, the coat hanger is in your closet. That's your shoulders. All right, so divisions. Top of the head to base of the nose, 1 unit of division. Base of the nose to pit of the neck, 1 unit of division. Pit of the neck to pit of the sternum, 1 unit of division. Pit of the sternum to 10th rib, 1 unit of division. 10th rib to iliac crest, 1 unit of division. One iliac crest to pubis, 1 unit of division, and that gets you down through the body. Or you can go 1 head, 2 heads, 3 heads, 4 heads. You can do that too, either way. The arm, the elbow runs into the rib cage base, so the length of this bone is roughly the length of this bone right here. And I'm going to bring that out to the edge of the torso. On the rib cage, 8th rib is the widest, 10th rib is the lowest, 5th rib or 6th rib is the division there, 5th rib, 6th rib division. And elbow hits this, wrist hits great trochanter, so that helps us with the length of our arms. When I draw the forearms as bones, I'll start with a box like this, and then I'll put a diagonal division to create a distinction of the ulna bone, which is a wide to narrow bone in your wrist. And that'll also help explain if the radius bone is rolled over or not. So we've got this shape in, we've got this length, we've judged this to this, we have those proportions working now. We've got the pelvis in here, the great trochanter, femur and tibia both kind of sit on top of each other almost like a box. Kneecap sits out here like this. This division comes down and divides fibula from tibia and the lower shin bone. So we've got all of that in place. Come out here to the iliac crest, pubis. Xiphoid process, 6th and 7th rib down to 10th rib. Sternum is the necktie, right? And that's including the manubrium and the xiphoid. Clavicle comes out, meets scapula. Scapula goes back, comes back out over here. This is all scapular division in this space. This is all clavicle in here. I'm going to do a stick figure version over here, and I'm going to put muscles on top of the stick figure. Knee in here, tib fib along in here, and the patella. Okay, so for the muscles, what I'm going to do is a nice little shape language. So we have the coat hanger here. I'm just going to draw half of the coat hanger, but I'll put the little hook in there to remind you. Coat hanger shape up there. For the arm, we have a triangle in here. For the bicep tricep group, we have 2 drinking glasses stacked on top of each other through here. For the forearm, we have the drumstick. For the pectoralis muscle, a Pixar fish, right? So we've got this right along in here. For the abdominal wall, we're going to think tongue sticking out. We're going to draw this down like this. It goes wide to narrow, and then the obliques actually go over the top of that, and these 2 muscles kind of sit over the top of each other like the deltoid and the trapezius on the back. The serratus muscles are over here. The latissimus muscle comes from the arm into the nape of the base of the rib cage, this little nape right here. The oblique is in here, goes up along this wall, and then interdigitates with the serratus muscles over here. And then along in the abdominal wall, we have rib cage division, rib cage filler, space between rib cage and pelvis, and then the lower abs, mid abs, midsection, rib section. And then there's fascia over here. There's fascia down along through here, splitting that muscle group from the other one. Go back up here really quickly and throw in the striations of the pectoralis and throw the divisions of the deltoid in. Divide the bicep here from the coracobrachialis here, the tricep over here, the brachialis here. Ridge muscles come down along through here, go to the outside of the arm towards the thumb, and they aim towards the thumb. Pronator teres in here, flexor digitorum group along in here, tendons that go down into the palm of the hand, which will draw here and bring these down into the fingertips. So you have one major division here, you have another major division here. I'm coming into a blunt pencil mode, so the lines are starting to look really crappy.
You can take a minute to sharpen if you need, Ron.
It's all right. It's all right. Gluteus maximus, tensor fascia. Tensor fascia goes into the iliotibial band. Tibial band goes to the tibia. Vastus lateralis medialis and rectus femoris make up this group in here that's sort of like a curving teardrop that sits right along in here. The rectus femoris comes down through the middle, divides the two sides. This side is a shorter, shallow side. This side is a longer side. Both of these sides meet up with the tendon that connects the patella to the tibia. So all of this is tendinous mass. Then we have the sartorius, so the letter S for sartorius. We bring that through here, and that divides our adductors, which are up here. We have the iliopsoas adductor. We have the adductor magnus, adductor longus, and adductor brevis, three of them in there. Gracilis comes down along here and frames it. So gracilis and sartorius both isolate this space, which is a triangle, and then turns this into its own space. And then coming down through here, shin bone does not actually have a bow to it like most people think. There's a curve in the front of the shin bone, but the shin bone and the fibula are both straight. Because if our bones aren't straight, we're not going to be walking. These are going to break. And then we've got, again, another drumstick or drumstick down here, and dividing that into the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the flexor digitorum group. Across the front, we have the tibialis anterior, the extensor digitorums, which go down into all the toes except the pinky toe, which has its own muscles on the outside of the foot. Peroneus longus and brevis that go down along the side of the leg, and this is becoming huge, but you can kind of see what I'm doing here. Soleus is just behind that, and gastrocnemius is just behind that up high. So we have a high-low relationship of our bumps on both sides here. We have a high-low relationship of those muscles here. We have a high-low relationship of the ankles here and here. So notice how everything kind of has rhythm to it. High-low here, high outside, low on the inside. Tricep to brachialis, high-low. And that's basically all the different muscle divisions. Thanks.
Nice.
Fantastic. So those are all your muscles, and Vanessa was just handing me a charcoal pencil, but the charcoal and the Prismacolor would have been like oil and water, so it wouldn't have worked.
Can you describe the neck too a little bit for us?
Oh yeah, okay. So in the neck, facing forward towards us, we have the letter M. So we think of Captain Marvel. Boom, 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 the letter M. All right, and we've got the chin that comes down like this. The letter M now is basically this. We have sternocleidomastoideus muscles. The sternocleido comes down from the ear and attaches to the pit of the sternum, which is this little like finger notch you can stick your finger inside of. And that notch is really only there because both clavicles stick up on both sides and cause this to feel even more depressed. And the tendon attaches to that depression on the sternum. Then this comes up and around the neck, comes down like this. And so the shape of the muscle is sort of like what I kind of equate it to is like one of those old writing quills. But if you're not old school and know that at all, it's a feather. And we have those little feathers on both sides. And then we have the clavicle that comes across this way. And that same muscle has a second division that comes off of it and reaches out about a third of the way out on length on the clavicle. And this is the sternum, cleido, clavicle, mastoideus, mastoid, which is your jaw up here on your face. And then through the middle here, we have the throat, which can be divided into two sections, the windpipe and the voice box. And then to the side, if we look at the neck in profile, we've got the C7 up high, the pit of the neck down low. We've got the letter N backwards through here. The throat sits out here. The letter N then gets divided. It turns into that feather shape, which then the clavicle is coming out this way. The band will come off in this direction. And then out in the last third of the clavicle out here, we've got the trapezius muscle. Goes against the back of your neck there, comes out and attaches to both the clavicle and the scapula. So it's this mass along here to the shoulder. And then there's a space between both of those. And within this space, there's the omohyoid muscle and the other hyoid muscles, which are all basically muscles that help the jaw move. And then we've got the throat right up in here. Actually, the omohyoid is the muscle that goes back along in here. These are the other hyoid bones. I think, anyway, I'm not going to remember the names right now. There's 3 others that are in here. And then there's a sheet that covers all of that up as much. And the sheet is called the platysma. The platysma goes from all along here on the face, down all along here on the neck. So each one of these platysmas covers up this much space and this much space. And you can kind of think of that at like a really tight, if you've surfed, it's a rash guard. And it's this really tight piece of skin that keeps all of the neck muscles tightened down. Kind of like in our wrist, we have these little wristbands, kind of like in tennis, you wear those sweat bands. And these are called the bands of the Richter. You have them across the hand and here. This one is called the palmaris retinaculum. And that retinaculum basically just holds all of these tendons right in here in your wrist down so that they don't go and blast off of your hand. So we have a band here, and then we have another band right across here. And the band that's here are where all of our thumb muscles attach. So our thumb muscles aren't on any bones. They're attached to this band right through here. That's your neck, your hand.
We have a request to see a diagram of a hand kind of broken down anatomically, if you don't mind.
Palm side, just like this. Let's see. Okay.
Your connection is also dropping off a little more than typical. It was actually fantastic the whole time. I don't know if Vanessa's doing anything or if anything's different than it was, but we're breaking up a little bit now. So.
Yeah, I think she was downloading the Gummy Bears movie or something like that. Okay, the fingers go up this way. All right, and so with our thumb over here, we have 2 sets of muscles within, actually we have several muscles, but if we're looking at the palm side, I'll do this with just my own hand. I'm going to squeeze right here and you can see this lump come up. That's called your interosseous muscle. And it's connected right along here on the thumb, and then it's connected right up here on the index finger, and then it's also attached down here along the metacarpal bone along here. And this muscle basically helps control this kind of action right along in here. And then we have those same muscles between each of these fingers on the top side, and it's to help when we spread our fingers out to bring our fingers back. So those are interosseous muscles. Those I won't draw because those are on the other side. But on the palm, we have this area right up in here. These are all basically the ball shapes of each of your metacarpal bones that are in here. And each one of these comes down and then becomes a block on this end, and all the blocks lock together like Legos. And then those block into your wrist bones in here, your carpal bones. And all of that together is like a little brick wall that holds these bones in place here, here, and here. Now we have these muscles, and then across here, okay, so then we have the wrist bones, the radius, and then the ulna bone, the radius and the ulna. And on both of those, we have these little knobs that stick out on them. And these little knobs are actually paired up with little bones up here and over here on the thumb. And these little bones and these little knobs are kind of like points where this is as far as this bone can go. So your hand can slide over this way and then it stops. And then it can slide this way and then it stops. Eversion and inversion is what that's called. And these little points over here and over here prevent the hand from moving any farther. Then we have 2 muscles on the inside over here. We have 2 muscles on the inside over here. And both of these muscles go and attach to the pinky finger over here, the base, which is called your proximal bone. You have your proximal, middle, and distal. And then over here on the thumb, you have your proximal and distal. So your distant and your close bone. And these muscles both attach to the proximal bone, and these are your flexor muscles, and they are your adductor muscles, which means to bring together, so they're adducting. And then you have one other muscle over here called your palmaris, and that reaches across and attaches to your thumb also, which is also helping control this action right here. So that's basically on the palm of your hand. You've got a squishy mass here. You've got a squishy mass over here. Both of those squishy masses are in the shape of a teardrop. And so is the one out here. This is also a teardrop shape right along in here. So all the muscle shapes in the hand are teardrop like. And on the outside edge where the pinky is, here's your pinky finger, the outside edge of this muscle is also doing this kind of a shape. So it's like a teardrop on the outside with the curve of the teardrop favoring the palm of your hand for flexing purposes. So wider back here, narrower as it connects to the pinky up in here. Diagram for the hand. Thank you. And that's it for the diagram of the hand.
Fantastic, Rod. I'm going to ask one more thing, and then I promise we'll let you go. On the capoeira pose you redrew, I'd love to see you take that new drawing, and can you light that figure from a different direction? Maybe something dramatic.
Absolutely. So let's take this. I'm going to have to kind of redraw it here really quickly.
Or tracing, or
yeah,
whatever works.
Let me do this. Okay, so let's see.
And now, as you begin to light this from imagination, I'm assuming it's still all these same basic geometric shapes you're thinking of, and how light kind of reacts with these crude forms.
Precisely.
Is there anything else you take away from realism that you need to kind of keep in mind, reflectivity or anything like that?
Well, yeah. So once you start getting into the lighting, there's all sorts of new problems that you open up. And those problems are anywhere from how light scatters and bounces to halftones and how halftones fall off as a gradient. Where is the light source directly? And let's see, where is this light source? By the way, let me turn on my computer real quick. I think they were being top lit, if I remember. Yeah, they're all being top lit. So this is easy then, because they're top lit. We can go left or right, and it doesn't matter. So I'll take the light source, and actually I'll make it this way, because we'll have more in the shadows. So then across the height of the bicep femoris, and then through the tendinous mass in the knee. And these are shapes now, you've got to understand with these shapes that I'm designing, these are coming from experience too, because I've drawn so many different figures in so many different conditions. The actual shadow patterns themselves fall in pattern and fall the same way frequently over and over and over again. And so if you're aware of this, then you just basically memorize those patterns as you go. And that's what I've been doing lately when I do figure drawing, is I'm just memorizing everything I'm drawing. And then I can take all these poses back with me, and I have a library built up of poses in my head that I can recall now.
I do much the same thing with faces, kind of Rembrandt lighting or Paramount lighting, and it's just these little anchor points where you plot out your shadows at any angle, and kind of you see those same patterns show up all the time.
Exactly. And that's the thing about drawing and painting, that as much as we draw different subject matter over and over and over again, there's going to be some repeatability along the way, no matter what it is that you're drawing. And the thing that, again, I don't think a lot of us take home well enough, because the schools don't necessarily help us understand this. But the whole idea of all of these things that we're doing is to learn how to memorize them all. And the more that you've learned to memorize, the farther you can take your work without needing any assistance other than your facilities of imagination to get you through it. But because schools are so different now in the way that everything is taught, and teachers really, most of them, I hearken to say that most of the teachers aren't absolutely qualified to teach. And a lot of really good artists that do their own gumroads and all that aren't really artist teachers as well. They're just making a video. So it's hard for people to teach the things the right way. And if they don't know how to teach it the right way, then they're not going to say any of those things at all. They're not going to tell you that a lot of this stuff is to memorize and blah, blah, blah. They're just going to say that you need to become aware of it. You need to know these things. And then you take it upon yourself to do whatever you want with them, because, you know, in these liberal days, you can do whatever you want, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's great. But I want an education. Teach me something first so that I can then take it and mold it and do whatever. So really, it does come down to memorization of all of these facts and memorizing them as well as you can. Kind of like I'm doing here. This is all based on memory. And I would not be able to do this if I did not have the experience experience, because those are the memories that I'm recalling now. And then we get, go ahead.
Obviously the memory is helping you here, but you could assess this. So when you're deciding on the terminator line, like around the stomach or the pectorals or something, for instance, you're looking for the apex of the form, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And so, of course, so while you get to a certain point, you could very easily assess from logic what is happening here. Like I can look at this and say, this ridge muscle thing kind of looks a little strange. It's passing too far around the arm. So I'm going to squeeze this shadow pattern over a little bit more and take away more of the light because I'm trying to recognize it being there, even though I should probably just let it go. And then with this one, I can see that this probably needs to come down a little bit lower. And then I recognize things like, well, there's going to be the clavicle in here that's probably going to be casting a shadow because both muscles are going to be hard above and below it. But at the same time, everything is compressing. So what do I have to do in here to create the effect well enough for somebody else to feel that? And that's when deduction goes in, because you might have a certain line that's there in the picture, in the photo reference, if you are copying a reference, but because it takes away from what you're trying to say about the picture, you have to take it away as well in order to make the picture stronger in its delivery.
So can you describe your thought process in deciding, say, for instance, where that cast shadow across the forward quads landed from the other leg?
Right. So the light is coming down in this direction. And what I'm thinking about are these projection lines like this. And in actuality, now that I've got them there, the leg will only be cast in shadow so far. Now that I've got these projection lines on here, it's kind of showing me that only the inner part of the thigh will be in cast shadow and that this part right up here will be in light. But because we're rolling back into the form of the muscle, it's going to fall back into shadow back over here. So now I've got this weird pattern here of light cutting through here. And do I want that? Or do I want to make it easier on the viewer by closing it off and making it easier for the viewer to read the 3D by having the ellipse completed instead of broken across the leg? And these are all logic points for the picture because obviously the picture has to read a certain way. And all of this would probably be in light. Now that I'm putting it together, now that I'm seeing it, it's probably a mistake to put it in light the way that I did. But I can't make that deduction until I can see it like this. And then I can take this and start breaking it back down into components.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to add specifically, Ron, before we kind of let you loose here? This has been incredible. There's a lot to absorb.
Well, what I would say about all of this is that I'm talking through history here, and I'm talking through a lot of repeated exercises and my own work, my own teaching, and so forth. So I'm making things happen really quickly, and I'm talking and drawing at the same time. So it's creating this illusion of simplicity. But really, this is not easy to do, and I'm sweating it over here. I can't wait for this to be over so I can go drink because I'm nervous. But no, it's this thing where I've built upon a lot of years of doing this. And so this is not hard for me to do now. It's going to take you a lot of focus to become or to create a drawing like this. And focus is not hard to get these days as long as you have answers. For my generation coming up, and I think Dan was a part of that, we had schools that didn't teach us things. We had some classes that kind of showed us the light, and then the rest of it was like, what are we doing? And I kind of went off on it with a group of people to rediscover the old foundation tools and bring them back and reinstill it into the system again because it wasn't fair. We wanted to do realism and we couldn't find it and the rules weren't out there. Now that we have all of these rules again, they're everywhere. They're all out there for you and they're clear. And a lot of people can explain things very clearly. You've got to be careful also where you go to get this information, but there's a lot more people out there that can explain things clearly. And so all of us together can learn this so much faster now than I did when I was first coming up. So a lot of the things that I tell you about how many years it took me to learn is a distortion based upon the absence of a good instructor.
Oh,
And
absolutely. People have DVDs now and broadcasts like this. So much stuff that I wish we had. There's been this revival of like this atelier style teaching like you do that just did not exist when I went to college. It wasn't an option.
Exactly. And so now we have it. And that's the thing is you can learn these things a lot quicker now, but learn to memorize like I'm doing here. And this is the way that I kind of set the bar for anybody. If you can turn around and teach this to your 5-year-old brother or sister, then you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, can you plot his cast shadow as well?
Do what?
His cast shadow on the floor.
So yeah, that's what I was starting to do
Yes,
there.
I probably got you off track.
So the cast shadow is going this way, and then the torso is down through here. So the bulk of the torso is in this space right here. And I'm going to think slightly bent pillow on the floor as well, just to plot it. And then off of that, I'm going to think the simple cylinders to plot those, find where the foot ends. The foot is going to be over here somewhere, and there is a distortion to the foot that's going to look a little bit weird as far as the angle goes. The toes are going to feel shallow compared to the heel because it's toe down and not toe profile. So the foot will feel a little bit weird when you go to block this out. And then this one's going to go off the page over here, but this shadow pattern would be over this way and come all the way over to here somewhere when we get done with it. Block that out a little bit there, find his head somewhere back around in here, and that's roughly the projected cast shadow that then needs to be molded.
Oh, fantastic. Ron, if you don't mind, would you just flip through your pages slowly one more time for everybody to kind of catch a glimpse of all this and recap?
Sure. So here was, well, let's bring the other pages in then too. Oh geez, there's a lot of them. All right. So we ended with this right here, with drawing this. Well, this was kind of throughout the day, but we now kind of arrive at that conclusion of this being the final result of taking this reference and rotating it in space. This was showing the same kind of concept, but using just the ear as a way of rotating the head from profile to back 3/4 view to plot the head. And I'm sure you could do it in front view too. I just haven't tried yet. This was my warm-up, but I did show this earlier, and this was to help me get started with the thought process of copying the reference and then altering the reference twice more, both top view down and from behind. Then we did an armature. I did an armature in the beginning of this demonstration to explain the concepts of the shapes that I use to animate the figure. In here we have a very scribbly mess of the shoulder. Trust me, it's a shoulder. Then we have these torsos here. And I was explaining how the pillow works within this mannequin that I set up. And remember again that the mannequin is solving two problems. It's solving the skeleton in space, which is the foundation of the entire figure, and the action movement of the figure. Two things in one. And once you get done with that, then you throw on the decorations, which are the muscles, tendons, and shadow patterns. This was explaining objective blocking in of observation drawing and enveloping, both informal and formal. This was taking that pillow shape of the torso and distorting it for character purposes. We then spoke about musculature and how muscles are truly flanked and not spherical. So when we draw realistically, this is how we draw. But we have two options then of decorative shading versus active shading. And this is the difference between convex lines over the surface versus concave lines over the surface, controlling the value of the light through notan so that you can steer it around both in its darkness and in its brightness. This was an example page of hands, and I believe the only other thing left was this template underneath here. Oh, wait, two. This hand diagram here. Oh, three, sorry. And this figurative diagram here, which is upside down. Yeah, that was everything we did.